370, 330, 370, 370. The logbook at the trailhead had our names in it twice. I want to say that first, before anything else. Because everything that came after hangs on it. And because it is the only piece of this that I could ever hand to another person and say, "Look, touch it. Tell me I imagined the paper." The parkway keeps registers at the busier access points. A green metal box bolted to a post, a spiral notebook inside a plastic bag, a pencil hanging from a loop of string that somebody replaces every spring. You write the name of your party, how many of you there are, the date, and where you intend to sleep. Rangers read them on their rounds. Search teams read them when a family calls the emergency line at 2 in the morning and cannot stop repeating a first name. Jessica Garcia always signed us in. She insisted on it. She said that if we ever went missing, she wanted the handwriting to be legible, and none of the rest of us could be trusted with that. She was 41 years old that summer. She worked in insurance claims, and she had the kind of patience that comes from reading other people's worst days for a living. She wrote in small square capitals with a slight backward lean. She had the pencil in her hand and the bag open when she stopped moving. I was 6 feet away, dragging a pack out of the back of the van, and I remember the exact quality of her silence, because Jessica was never quiet in that particular way. She was quiet the way people go quiet when the floor of an elevator drops half an inch. "Come here," she said. There were 8 of us in the parking pullout that morning, plus me. James Smith, 34, who had planned the route and printed the maps and laminated them, because James believed that lamination was a form of insurance. Emily Johnson, 38, an emergency medical technician out of Winston-Salem, who could stay calmer than any human being I have ever met while somebody bled on her boots. Michael Williams, 45, a bow hunter, the only one of us who genuinely belonged in those mountains. Robert Wilson, 47, loud, generous, allergic to silence. Amanda Clark, 36, who was Robert's cousin and his opposite in every way. William Rodriguez, 63, the oldest of us, born in a holler 2 counties over, invited because James thought it would be good to have somebody along who knew the country before the country was a park. Ashley Martinez, 47, a middle school teacher who had done exactly 1 overnight trip in her life and had spent 11 months talking about this one. And me. I was the one with the least reason to be there and the most reason, later, to wish I had stayed in the van. We crowded around Jessica and looked at the notebook. The current page had a handful of entries in it. A couple from Ohio going up to camp near the ridge, a solo hiker named only as DK, 3 men who had listed their party as the Lawn Chair Expeditionary Force, which made Robert laugh out loud. And above those, 4 lines up, dated the 9th of July, 3 days before we ever arrived, in small square capitals with a slight backward lean, was this: Party of 8. Smith, Johnson, Williams, Garcia, Wilson, Clark, Rodriguez, Martinez. Under the column that asked where we intended to sleep, somebody had written a single word: up. Nobody said anything for a while. A vehicle went by on the parkway behind us, one of those slow tourist crawls, and the sound of it arrived and left, and the silence closed over the gap it made. Robert broke first, the way he always did. "That is you," he said to Jessica. "That is your handwriting. You wrote that." "I have never been here before," Jessica said. "None of us have. We booked this in February." James took the notebook out of her hands and held it up to the light, tilting it, as though the paper might confess under a different angle. He was the practical one. He wanted a mechanism. "Somebody is messing with us," he said. "Somebody saw the reservation, or the group chat, or the shared calendar. It is a prank." "Who?" Emily said. "Who has our ages?" That stopped him, because our ages were there too, in the margin, in small, neat numbers: 34, 38, 45, 41, 47, 36, 63. 47. Correct, all of them, including Ashley's, which she had been quietly lying about at work for 2 years. William Rodriguez had not come to look. He was standing by the guardrail with his back to us, facing the drop and the blue folded distance beyond it, and he was rolling his shoulders the way a man does when a cold draft finds him indoors. He said, without turning around, "Tear that page out." Robert laughed. "What?" "Tear it out," William said, "and burn it in the ashtray of the van, and then we drive down to Asheville and eat lunch and go home." Nobody moved. I want to describe William Rodriguez properly, because he becomes important, and because for the first 2 days most of us privately thought he was being a superstitious old man, and every one of us would spend the rest of our lives owing him an apology we cannot deliver. He was a small, dense man with hands like tool handles. He had worked 40 years in road maintenance for the state, half of that on the parkway itself, plowing the high sections in February and cutting deadfall in August. He knew the mileposts the way most people know the rooms of their own house. He had a way of pausing in the middle of a sentence to make sure the sentence was worth finishing. When he laughed, it was one note, and then it was over. He turned around and looked at the 8 of us, and he said, "I have seen a lot of foolishness in that box over the years. People write jokes. People write proposals. Somebody wrote a whole recipe once. I have never once seen a party sign itself in before it arrived." "Then who did?" Amanda asked. Her voice was thin. William did not answer that. He looked at Jessica and he said, "Was your name spelled right?" She said yes. He said, "Then it is not a joke, and it is not for us. It is for whatever reads that book after we are gone." Robert made a sound and walked away toward the van, and that was the end of the discussion, because we were 8 adults who had taken vacation days and driven 400 miles and bought 40 pounds of freeze-dried food, and none of us was going to be the one who called it off over a page in a notebook. We hiked in at 10:40 in the morning. I will not pretend the first day was frightening. It was not. It was one of the best days of my life, and I have gone back over it 1,000 times since, looking for the seam, the moment where it turned, and I cannot find it, which is its own kind of horror. The trail climbed through rhododendrons so thick above our heads that the whole world went green and shadowed and cool, and then it broke out onto open grass balds where the wind hit us clean, and the mountains stacked away in blue and pale gray, until they became weather. Michael pointed out Bear Scat and told us it was 3 days old, and Ashley took a photograph of it, of Scat, because she was that happy. We covered 9 miles and made camp in a saddle between 2 humps of bald, a flat place with a fire ring already there and a spring 50 yards down the north slope. 6 tents. Michael and Robert shared. James and Emily shared. The rest of us had our own. The trouble started at dusk, and it started so small that 4 of us did not notice it at all. Michael went down to the spring to filter water and came back with the bag still empty. "I want somebody else to look at something," he said. He said it in a flat voice, without the grin he used for everything else, and Emily and William and I followed him down the slope. The light was going amber and long. The spring came out of a rock face into a shallow basin somebody had lined with stones a long time ago. Around the basin, in the wet black soil, there were tracks, deer tracks, dozens of them, layered, coming in from 3 directions. Nothing strange about that. Deer drink. And then, cut into the middle of them, one line of tracks that walked out of the basin and up the bank and into the laurel. They were deer tracks too, split hooves, the right size, the right shape. They were spaced like a man walking, heel to heel, one in front of the other, 30 inches apart, in a straight line, the way you and I walk. Not the 4-legged pattern of an animal at all, and they were deeper at the back than the front, the way a heavy body presses down when it stands up on 2. Michael crouched and put his hand flat next to one of them and did not touch it. He had been hunting since he was 11 years old. "I have no idea," he said. "I want to be honest with you all. I have no idea what that is." Emily said, "A person could fake it, carve something. Kids do it." 15 miles from a road, Michael said, "at the top of a mountain." "Sure." William Rodriguez had not crouched. He was standing 3 steps back from the water with his arms at his sides and his chin lifted slightly, and he was not looking at the tracks at all. He was looking up the bank at the laurel, where the tracks went in, into that low, tangled thicket where the branches knit together over your head and the ground goes lightless even at noon. He said, quietly, "Do not follow those." I said, "I was not going to." He said, "I am not talking to you." I turned around. There was nobody behind me. There was nothing on the slope but the 6 of us, and the spring, and the evening. He said it again, a little louder, in the direction of the laurel, in the tone of a man reminding a dog of a rule it already knows. Then he picked up the water bags and started filling them himself, and we went back up to camp and ate, and Robert told a story about a wedding, and everybody laughed, and the fire burned down. And I lay in my tent afterward listening to the wind come over the bald in long, soft passes, thinking about how good my legs felt and how I would sleep like a stone. At some point after midnight, the wind stopped. Not gradually. It went from a steady rush to nothing, between one breath and the next, the way a fan stops when the power is cut. and in the silence that opened up underneath it, from somewhere below the camp, down toward the spring, I heard a woman clear her throat. It was such a small, ordinary, human sound. 2 soft coughs, the sound a person makes before they start speaking, before a toast, before an apology. I lay there with my eyes open in the black, and I told myself it was Amanda, or Ashley, walking down to relieve herself, and I was almost asleep again when it came a second time, closer, from just outside the ring of tents, and I realized what was wrong with it. It was not a woman clearing her throat. It was something practicing. In the morning, nobody wanted to be the first to say it, so we went around the fire ring saying it sideways instead. "Weird night," James offered. "Windy," said Emily, who had been awake for most of it, and who was watching me while she said it. Amanda Clark did not bother with the sideways version. She had not slept at all. She sat with her sleeping bag still wrapped around her shoulders in the July warmth, and she said, "Somebody was walking around the tents." Robert told her it was a bear. Robert told her that with enormous confidence, because Robert loved his cousin and wanted her to be all right, and because a bear was a thing that existed and could be shot or scared or reported to a ranger. "Bears do not clear their throat," I said. That got everybody's attention, and it also got me a look from William Rodriguez that I did not understand at the time. It was not surprise. It was something closer to disappointment, the way a teacher looks at a student who has said the answer out loud in a room where the answer should not have been said out loud. Michael Williams settled it, or thought he did. He said we would move camp that day, push another 7 miles north along the ridge, get away from whatever was using that spring, and if anything followed us, he would deal with it. He had a compound bow strapped to his pack, and he was very good with it. He had a permit for the season, and no legal business hunting in a national park, and I mention that because it mattered later to the people who asked questions, and because it did not matter at all to what actually happened. We broke camp at 8. The morning was clear and hot, and the balds were full of blackberry and the sound of insects. At 11, Ashley Martinez stopped in the middle of the trail and said, "Is that an elk?" There is no elk herd on that stretch of the parkway. There are elk in the park to the west, reintroduced, well documented, and people drive from 4 states to photograph them in a valley 80 miles away. There are none on that ridge. Michael told her so even as he was looking where she was looking. It was standing in the open, about 90 yards off, in the seam where the grass of the bald ran into a shelf of low trees. It was too big to be a whitetail. The body was wrong, long and heavy through the chest and then narrow, too narrow, at the hips, as though something had been assembled out of 2 animals of different sizes. The coat was the color of wet bark, and it hung loose in places, gathered in folds along the flank the way a coat hangs on a man who has lost a great deal of weight. The head was down in the grass. The antlers were enormous and irregular. One side swept up in a proper rack, 7 points, beautiful. The other side came off the skull low and forward and ended in a blunt knuckle, like a branch that had been broken and had healed wrong. Jessica had the binoculars first. She looked for maybe 4 seconds, and then she took them away from her face and handed them to James without a word, and stepped backward into the middle of our group, and Jessica Garcia was not a woman who stepped backward. James looked, his mouth opened slightly. He passed them to me. Through the glass I could see that the animal was chewing, and I could see that its head was down in the grass, and I could see, at the same time, that its eyes were on us. Its head was pointed away, the neck was turned away, and the eyes were forward, in the front of that long skull, wet and round and set close together, watching us over the top of the grass. Deer do not have eyes in the front of their heads. Deer eyes sit on the sides, wide apart, so they can see the whole world at once except the thing directly in front of them. Every child who has ever looked at a deer knows this without knowing they know it. That is what makes you scream when you finally see a face where a face should not be. It is not the strangeness. It is the familiarity arriving in the wrong arrangement. Michael already had an arrow on the string. "Do not," William said. "It is sick," Michael said. "Look at it. That thing is sick, and it is going to come through a campground at some point and hurt somebody." "Michael," William said, and it was the only time in the whole trip that his voice went up, "do not put an arrow in that." And then the animal solved the argument for us. It stood up. I need to be careful here, because this is the part that people stop believing, and it is also the part that I see when I close my eyes at night, so I am going to describe it exactly as it happened, and let the believing fall where it falls. The front legs came off the ground, not the way a deer rears, that quick, nervous strike and drop. It came up slowly. the way a person rises out of a chair when their back hurts, one segment at a time, the spine unfolding vertebra by vertebra with a sound we could hear from 90 yards away, a wet series of small clicks like knuckles cracking down a long line, and then it was standing on two legs. It was, I would guess, 8 feet tall. The rear legs had straightened into something that had a knee in the human place. The front legs hung. They were far too long. The joints in them bent in more directions than joints do, and it kept its head down and it kept those eyes on us. Ashley Martinez started to scream, and Emily Johnson clamped a hand over her mouth so fast that Ashley bit her, and Emily did not let go and did not make a sound about it, and there was blood running down Emily's wrist, and she just held on. William Rodriguez said, in a completely level voice, "Everybody look at the ground." "What?" James said. "Look at the ground. Right now. Do not look at it. Do not point at it. Do not say anything about what it is." We looked at the ground, all 8 of us, in the grass, on a mountain, in the full sunlight of a July morning, staring at our own boots because a 63-year-old road worker told us to. I could hear Amanda crying. I could hear the insects. I could hear my own pulse in my ears. And then I heard it move. It did not run. It walked. 90 yards away, through the grass, at a steady, unhurried pace, and the sound of the steps was not the sound of hooves. It was a heavy, flat slap, like the flat of a hand on a table, over and over, and it went from our left to our right in a wide arc, all the way around us, taking its time, staying exactly the same distance away. It circled us completely. It took about 4 minutes. I counted the steps for part of it and then stopped counting because the number was making me sick. When it finished the circle, it went back into the trees on the far side, and the sound stopped. Nobody looked up for a long time after that. When we finally did, the bald was empty, and the morning was exactly as bright as it had been. Michael Williams, who had grown up in those mountains, who had field-dressed his first buck at 12, sat down in the grass with his bow across his knees and put his face in his hands and stayed that way while we stood around him. Robert Wilson said, "We are going down. Right now, we are going down the way we came." And William Rodriguez, who was already looking back along the trail we had walked in on, said, "No, we are not." "Why not?" said Robert. "Because it went around us," William said. "That is what the circle is for. You do not walk out of a circle the same way you walked into it." We made camp early that afternoon on a rock shelf, out in the open, with a drop on one side and clear ground on the other 3, because William said we needed to be able to see, and because none of us could stand the idea of the laurel anymore. Then he sat us down and told us the rules. I want to say something about how that felt. We were 8 educated adults. Between us we had mortgages and a retirement account and a teaching certificate and an insurance license. 2 hours earlier we had all watched a thing stand up out of a deer and walk in a circle around us. And now we were sitting on a rock in a horseshoe, listening to a man in a faded work shirt tell us what we were and were not allowed to do, and not one person interrupted him. That is what fear actually does. It does not make you brave or clever. It makes you extremely willing to be told. He said the following things, and I have written them down so many times since that I know them the way you know a prayer. Do not say what it is. Do not name it. Not out loud, not in a whisper, not to yourself in the tent. It comes toward the name. Do not look it in the face if you can avoid it. And if you cannot avoid it, do not let it see that you are afraid of the face. It is very interested in the face. Do not answer a voice you recognize unless you can see the mouth it came out of. Do not go anywhere alone, not for water, not to relieve yourself, not for anything. If something asks you to come out, do not come out. It cannot make you. That is the whole reason it asks. And the last one, which he said while looking at the ground. If somebody comes back to camp, count the group before you let them in. Emily Johnson, who was wrapping her own bitten hand while he talked, said, "William, what is it?" He said, "I told you the first rule." She said, "I am not asking for a name. I am asking what it is. What does it want? Why us?" And he said, "I do not think it wants anything the way you and I want things. My grandmother had a word for it in a language I never learned properly, and the closest she ever got in English was that it puts on. That is the whole of it. It puts on. It saw a deer and it put the deer on, and it did not fit right, and it came out of it, and now it has seen us." Ashley Martinez said, "Put on what?" And then she understood, and she went and sat by herself at the edge of the rock. Robert Wilson did not accept any of it. He needed to be angry at something, and William was available. He said it was a story. He said his cousin was having a panic attack because of a story. He said he was going to walk out at first light with or without permission, and if the rest of us wanted to sit on a rock and observe folklore, that was our business. Nobody argued with him. There was no point. Robert was not really talking to us. The mimicry started at 9 o'clock that night. The first thing it did was cry like a fawn. Every hunter knows that sound, and Michael went white the second it started, because a fawn call is the oldest trick in those woods, and the one predators use most. It came from below the shelf, from the trees, high and thin and repeating. We sat around a fire we had built far too large, and we did not answer it. After 20 minutes the fawn stopped, and there was a long silence, and then a woman said, very clearly, "Michael, help me." It was Jessica's voice. Jessica Garcia was sitting 11 inches away from Michael Williams, with her knees pulled up to her chest. She had not opened her mouth. She heard her own voice come out of the tree line calling a man's name, and she put both hands over her ears and pushed until her fingers went white. "Michael, help me. I fell and I cannot get up." It was perfect. That is what I cannot get across, no matter how I say it. It was not close. It was not an approximation. It had the small crack her voice got on a hard consonant. It had her exact way of running two words together, and then it did James, and then it did Amanda, and then it did all of us in turn, one after another, a whole camp of voices calling out of the trees from 90 feet away, our own names in our own mouths, saying help me, saying I am hurt, saying come down here, saying please. It did me. I sat there in front of that fire, and I listened to myself beg my friends to come into the trees, and I have never in my life felt as far away from my own body. The only voice it did not have was William Rodriguez. I noticed that at the time, and I have thought about it every day since. It ran through the other 7 of us twice, and it never once did him. And when I looked over at him, he was sitting perfectly still with his eyes closed and his lips moving, not praying exactly, just moving. And I understood that he had done this before, or that somebody who raised him had. At some point after midnight, it changed tactics. It stopped calling and it started sobbing. A woman, crying, out beyond the fire. Not our voices anymore. Somebody else. Somebody young. Hopeless, exhausted crying. The kind that has been going on for hours. The kind you hear through an apartment wall and cannot ignore. That one was almost too much. Ashley stood up twice, and both times Emily pulled her back down. And at around 2 in the morning the crying stopped, and a man's voice said, from much closer than anything had been all night, from just past the edge of the firelight, in a friendly and slightly tired tone, "Hey folks, Ranger, everything all right up here?" Amanda made a small noise of pure relief and started to get up. William Rodriguez caught her by the wrist and did not let go. "Ask him where the register box is," William said, quietly, to me. He did not raise his voice toward the thing in the shadow. He said it to me. So I called out, and my voice came out steady, which surprised me. I said, "Sure, we are fine. Which trailhead did you come up from?" There was a pause. It was maybe 2 seconds long, and in the whole of my life I have never heard a silence work as hard as that one did. Then the voice said, in exactly the same friendly and slightly tired tone, "Everything all right up here?" "Hey folks, Ranger." It had the words. It had every syllable, the accent, the little rise at the end. It did not have the order. Nobody moved for the rest of the night, not one of us. The fire went down to coals and we let it, because feeding it meant standing up, and we sat in a ring of 8 facing outward at a mountain that was making noises at us in our own voices until the sky went gray. At first light we counted ourselves, and there were 8, and Robert Wilson said, in a voice that had nothing left in it at all, all right. What do we do?" And William said, "We walk north. We do not stop. We come out on the parkway at the overlook and we flag a car. North was 11 miles. We made 4. We lost Robert Wilson at 4 in the afternoon, in full daylight, on an open trail, with 7 people around him." That is the detail that the search coordinator kept coming back to. She was very kind about it and very patient, and she asked me 9 separate times how a grown man disappears from the middle of a line of hikers in daylight. And every time I told her the truth, and every time I watched her write down something that was not what I had said. Here is how it happened. The trail dropped off the balds into a long stretch of hardwood where the canopy closed over us and the temperature fell 10 degrees. Michael was in front. Then Jessica, James, Emily, Ashley, Amanda, Robert. William and I were at the back, in that order, because William had put himself last and had put me in front of him. There was a blowdown across the trail, a big oak, chest high, and we went over it one at a time. Michael went over, Jessica went over, James, Emily, Ashley, Amanda. Robert put both hands on the trunk, and Amanda, who had just come down on the other side, said, "Rob, come on." And Robert said, "Yeah," and he did not come over. I was 4 feet behind him, and I did not see him go anywhere. I want that understood. I did not look away. I did not blink at the wrong moment. I did not turn my head. There was a man with both hands flat on a fallen oak, and then there was a fallen oak, and my own hands were reaching for it, and there was nobody in front of me at all. William Rodriguez grabbed the back of my pack and hauled me backward so hard I went down in the trail. "Nobody run," he said. "Nobody run. Everybody stay where you are, and everybody keep talking." "Talking," James said. "Say something. Anything. Keep your voice going so we know where each other is." So 8 people, 7 people, stood in a hardwood forest saying nonsense out loud. Ashley recited the names of her students. Emily counted backward from 100. Jessica said the alphabet. James said the mileposts off his laminated map, over and over, in order. And Amanda Clark screamed her cousin's name into the trees until her voice broke, and he did not answer, and eventually she stopped and slid down against the trunk and sat in the dirt. We searched for 2 hours in a chain, hand to hand, never letting go, which was William's idea, and which is the only reason I believe we did not lose anybody else that afternoon. We found his hat 40 feet off the trail, on the ground, right side up, set down flat, the way you set a hat on a table when you come inside a house. We found nothing else, no blood, no drag mark, no broken brush. 240 pounds of man does not go through a rhododendron thicket without the thicket knowing about it, and the thicket did not know a thing. Michael Williams said what we were all thinking, which is that we needed to call for help, and we all took our phones out again for the 40th time and looked at the same absence of bars, and the elevation and the ridge and the geography did to us what it does to everybody up there. We made camp on the trail itself. That is not a thing you do. There was nowhere else. We put the tents in the middle of the tread and built the fire on bare dirt and sat in a ring. He came back at 10:12 at night. I remember the time because I had been checking my phone compulsively, and I remember that it was Ashley who saw him first, and I remember the sound she made, which was not a scream. It was a laugh. A short, bright, disbelieving laugh, the noise a person makes when the worst thing turns out to be untrue. Robert Wilson was standing at the edge of the firelight, about 30 feet down the trail, in the direction we had come from. He looked exactly right. His pack was gone, but his clothes were his clothes, and his shape was his shape, and the firelight moved on his face the way firelight moves on a face. Amanda got up, and William Rodriguez said, very quietly, without moving, "Count." Amanda said, "He is right there." "Count us," William said. "Count us first," out loud, and Emily Johnson, who I think saved 4 lives that night simply by being the sort of person who follows a procedure under pressure, started counting. Me, Jessica, James, Michael, Ashley, Amanda, William, Emily. 8. We had lost Robert. There were 7 of us. Emily counted 8 of us sitting around the fire. I looked at the ring. I looked at every face. Everybody was where they had been. Nobody had moved. And when I counted, I got 7. And when I counted again, I got 8. And I could not make my finger land on the extra one. Every time I got to the end of the ring, there was one more person than there were bodies, and my eyes would slide off the gap the way your eye slides off a word you have misread. Amanda took a step toward the figure at the edge of the light. Robert said, "Manda." He had never called her that in his life. Nobody had. She hated it. She had told a room full of us at Thanksgiving that she hated it. He said it again. "Manda, come here. I am hurt. Come here and do not tell them." And that was the thing that broke the spell. Because Robert Wilson could not have kept a secret if you had sewn his mouth shut, and Amanda knew that better than anyone alive. She said, "You are not him." The figure stopped smiling. I use the word smiling because I do not have a better one. But what happened to that face was not a smile leaving it. It was more like the face lost interest in being a face. Everything on it slackened at once, all the small muscles that a person is never not using, and it hung there, and then the head tilted over sideways much further than a neck goes, until the ear was nearly on the shoulder, and it looked at us out of the corner of its eyes, and it said, in Robert's voice, in a tone of ordinary conversation, "Count them again." Then it walked backward into the shadow, upright, at speed, without turning around and without looking where it was going, 30 feet, 40, until it was gone. We put every stick we had on that fire. At some point in the small hours, William Rodriguez leaned over to me and said the only thing he ever said to me that I have never repeated to the searchers, or to the families, or to anybody. He said, "In the morning we are going to walk out, and some of us are going to make it. When we get down, look at everybody's hands." I said, "Why the hands?" And he said, "Because it never gets the hands right, and because that is how my grandmother found out about her brother." We started walking at 4:40 in the morning, before there was any real light, because William said the last hour of night was the safest hour, and I did not ask him how he knew. If you have made it this far with me, and you are still listening, then do me one favor before I finish, because the last part is the part I have never told properly. Leave something behind. A word, a single letter, whatever you have got. It costs you nothing, and it tells me that somebody out there heard the whole thing, and after 11 years that turns out to matter more than I expected it to. There were 7 of us on the trail. I counted before we moved and I got 7, and then I counted again and got 7, and I said thank you out loud to nobody in particular. The first 6 miles were nothing. That was the cruelty of it. Birds started up at dawn the way birds do. There was mist in the low places and it burned off. Ashley Martinez asked whether anybody thought there would be a gas station near the overlook, because she wanted a cold drink, and everybody said yes, and for about 20 minutes we were 7 people walking to a gas station. At mile 7 the birds stopped. All of them, everywhere, at once. You do not realize how much noise a forest is making until the forest decides to stop. Michael Williams stopped walking. He said, "It is on the left." I heard it then, moving parallel to us through the understory, 30 or 40 yards out, keeping pace exactly, not stalking, escorting. That flat, heavy slap of a step, the same as the bald, and every so often a sound that I can only describe as somebody trying out a laugh they had heard once and had not understood. "Do not run," William said. "Do not run. We walk. We keep the line." We walked. It walked. For 2 miles, and then it started calling in Robert's voice, and Amanda Clark began to shake so badly that Emily had to put an arm through hers and carry half her weight. At mile 9.5, the trail bent hard around the nose of a ridge, and William Rodriguez stopped in the middle of the tread and turned around and told us to keep going. James said no. William said, "It has been on our left for 2 miles because the trail bends right up ahead, and when it bends, we will be walking straight into it. Somebody has to go left." Emily said, "That is not happening." And that small, dense old man, who had told us the rules and been right about every single one of them, looked at us with an expression of enormous patience and said, "I have known about this since I was 6 years old, and I came up here anyway, because I wanted to see the balds one more time. That was my choice. Now go." Then he stepped off the trail into the laurel, and he did not sneak, and he did not hide. He went crashing through it, making as much noise as one human being can make, shouting, and he was shouting a name. I will not write the name down. It was not English, and I do not know how it is spelled, and William Rodriguez told us on the first night never to say it out loud. He said it, over and over, at the top of his lungs, going away from us into the green, and the thing that had been walking on our left turned and went after him, and it was not slow anymore, and the sound of it moving through that thicket was the sound of a vehicle. We ran. God forgive us, we ran, all 6 of us, and we came around the nose of the ridge and down the switchbacks and out through the last belt of rhododendron, and we came over the guardrail onto the asphalt of the Blue Ridge Parkway at 11:20 in the morning into the middle of a commons. Family from Michigan taking a photograph of the view. I remember the mother's face. I remember that her camera was still up. There is a great deal I could tell you about the 4 days that followed. About the search, which was enormous, and which involved dogs and a helicopter and more than 100 volunteers, and which found the hat and found one boot belonging to William Rodriguez, 1,100 feet from where he went into the laurel, up a slope that would take a fit man 40 minutes to climb, and found nothing else, ever. About the interviews, and the way the questions changed on the second day from where were you to what did you take. About the 2 families, and what you say to them, and how you learn very quickly that the truth is a cruelty, and a lie is a different cruelty, and there is no third option. But there is only one thing left that matters, and it happened at the trailhead where we started. 9 days later, I drove back up there alone to get the van, which had been sitting in the pullout the whole time. It was a bright, cool morning, and the parkway was full of motorcycles. The register box was still on its post. I opened it because I could not stop myself. The page with our names on it was gone, torn out. I do not know by whom. On the current page, dated 4 days earlier, in small square capitals with a slight backward lean, somebody had written this. Party of 8, down. 8, not 6. Not the 6 of us who came over that guardrail. And I stood there in the sunshine with a spiral notebook in my hands, and I thought about William Rodriguez telling me to look at everybody's hands, and I thought about the fact that I had never done it. Because by the time we reached the road there were sirens and blankets, and a woman from Michigan crying, and I had simply forgotten. We still meet, the 5 of us who can stand to. There is a place in Greensboro, once a year, in July. James brings the maps. Jessica brings a photograph from the first day, the good day, the one where Ashley is laughing at the bear scat. Ashley Martinez comes every year. She sits at the end of the table. She is warm and funny, and she remembers everything about that trip in perfect detail, more detail than any of us, and she is the only one of us who is not afraid to talk about it. 2 years ago she reached across the table to pass me the salt. I have not been able to eat in front of her since. Her hands are wrong. Not damaged, not scarred. Wrong the way the antler was wrong the way the eyes in that long skull were wrong. The fingers are a little too even, all of them the same length as each other, like a thing built by somebody working from a description of a hand rather than from a hand. Nobody else has noticed. I have watched them all, carefully, for 2 years, and nobody else has noticed, and I have never said one word about it to anybody, and I never will. Because there is one rule William Rodriguez gave us on that rock shelf that I have kept better than all the others. Do not say what it is. It comes toward the name. There is a photograph on my phone that I have never been able to delete. I have opened the menu 100 times. My thumb hovers over the button. Then I lock the screen and set the phone face down on the table, and I go and check that the front door is bolted, and I sit in the kitchen with every light burning until the sky turns gray. The photograph was taken on the ledge at McAfee Knob at 7:40 in the evening on the 11th of July. It shows a row of people sitting on that famous slab of stone, with the Catawba Valley falling away behind them, the ridges layered blue on blue like something painted on glass. Sandra set her camera on a flat rock, pressed the timer, and ran back to squeeze in at the end of the line. 9 of us went up that mountain. 9 of us sat down on that ledge. I have counted the figures in that photograph more times than I can say. There are 10. The 10th is at the far left, past Walter, half out of frame. It is taller than any of us. It is folded down into a crouch the way a heron folds, all angle and hinge, and where the face should be there is a smear of pale that the camera could not settle on. Nobody noticed it that evening. Nobody noticed it for 2 days. And by the time I saw it, sitting in a hospital corridor in Salem with my hands shaking so badly I could not hold a paper cup, 4 of the people in that photograph were already gone. Let me go back to the parking lot. We met at the lot on Virginia Route 311 at 6 in the morning, which is late by hiker standards and early by every other measure. I had been organizing weekend trips for our club out of Roanoke for 11 years. Section walks, mostly, nothing heroic. The plan that weekend was simple, and it was a plan I had run before. Up the switchbacks to McAfee Knob, sunset on the ledge, overnight at the campsite past Campbell Shelter, then out along the ridge toward Tinker Cliffs in the morning. 2 easy days, a summer trip. People bring their families to McAfee Knob. People propose there. It is the most photographed spot on the entire Appalachian Trail, and on a July weekend you will meet 40 strangers on that path before lunch. We met none. There were 8 of them with me. Peter Foster was 37, thin as fence wire, and had bought every item of gear he owned in the previous 3 weeks. His pack still had the tags on the hip belt. He had a compass, 2 water filters, a paper map in a plastic sleeve, and a level of enthusiasm that I have since come to think of as a kind of innocence. Gloria Gonzalez was 58 and had taught 4th grade for 31 years, which meant she counted heads without being asked to, and did it every 20 minutes. She kept a small notebook for birds. That notebook matters later. Vincent Bryant was 55 and ran a small contracting outfit in Vinton. He carried far more weight than he needed to and joked the entire way up about how his knees were going to file a complaint with management. Sandra Alexander was 33 and barely spoke, which people sometimes mistook for coldness. She photographed everything. She had an eye for the parts of a place that other people walked past. Walter Russell was 67. He had hunted these ridges since he was a boy, and before that he had spent 19 years working fence line and range on ranches out in Arizona and New Mexico. He said very little on the drive. He watched the tree line out the window the way other men watch traffic. Crystal Griffin was 43 and worked emergency nights at a hospital in Roanoke. She had the calm of somebody who has seen bad things arrive on a gurney and has learned to keep her voice flat while her hands work. Ethan Diaz was 39 and ran the trails around Carvin's Cove for sport. He was faster than all of us and hated waiting, and he had a habit of pushing ahead and then sitting on a rock looking bored when we caught up. Yasmin Hayes was 51 and owned a garden supply place off Williamson Road. She could name every plant on that mountain, and she talked to them, and I never once thought that was strange until later. There was a truck already in the lot when we arrived, an old green pickup with a topper, backed into the corner, and a man sitting in the driver's seat with the window down and the engine off. He was smoking, and he did not look at any of us while we sorted packs. When I walked past him toward the trailhead sign, he spoke without turning his head. He said, "You going up top?" I said we were. He said, "The deer are gone." I stopped. I asked him what he meant. He said he had been coming up here to hunt these hollows for 31 years, and that he had walked the fire road 4 days running, and there was not a deer, not a turkey, not a bear, not so much as a squirrel between the road and the ridge. He said the whole mountain had emptied out like water out of a bucket. Then he flicked his cigarette into the gravel, rolled up his window, and started his engine, and he drove out of that lot, and I never saw him again, and I have thought about him every single week for 4 years. Gloria heard the tail end of it. She said, "Well, that is superstition," and she said it in the bright voice she used to use on 9-year-olds. But 2 hours up the trail, she stopped in the middle of the path with her head tilted and her notebook open, and she said, "Has anybody heard a single bird?" None of us had. I want you to understand what that means. If you have never walked an Appalachian ridge in July, that forest should be a wall of noise. Wood thrush, towhees, the endless sawing of cicadas, chipmunks going off like alarm clocks in the leaf litter. It should be so loud that you raise your voice to be heard over it. What we walked through that morning was a green silence, so total that I could hear the fabric of Vincent's pack strap rubbing against his shirt from 20 feet back. We passed John Spring Shelter around 9. The logbook was there in its plastic box, and Peter opened it because Peter opened everything. He read the last few entries out loud in a cheerful voice, and then he stopped reading out loud. I took it from him. The last 4 pages had been written by the same hand. Not 4 entries, 4 pages. The same sentence, over and over, in handwriting that started neat and became something that ran off the edges of the paper. It said, "Do not answer it when it uses your name." That was all. Down the page, across the page, sideways in the margins, pressed so hard in places that the pen had torn through to the page underneath. Vincent laughed and said, "Through hikers get strange after 4 months." Crystal did not laugh. She looked at the pages the way she probably looked at a chart. And then she closed the book and put it back in the box and said, "Let us keep moving." Half a mile past the shelter, on the wide switchback where the trail cuts back on itself under the rock, there was a deer standing in the middle of the path. A doe, 40 feet ahead, broadside, absolutely still. Ethan was at the front. He stopped, and we all stopped behind him, and for maybe 15 seconds nothing at all happened. A deer will not do that. A deer gives you 2 seconds and a white tail, and it is gone. This one stood and turned its head toward us, and it turned its head much too far, the way an owl turns, until it was looking back over its own spine at 9 human beings without moving its body at all. Its legs were wrong. I have gone over this in my mind so many times, and I cannot make it sound like anything but the truth. The forelegs were too long. The knees sat too high, up near where the chest should be, so the animal seemed to be standing in a hole that was not there. Yasmin made a small sound behind me. The deer walked off the trail. It did not run. It stepped into the laurel, and the laurel did not move, did not so much as shiver, and it was simply not there anymore. Nobody said anything for a long time. Then Ethan laughed too loudly and said something about inbreeding in the local herd, and we walked on, and I looked at Walter, and Walter was not looking at the laurel. Walter was looking at the ground. We got to the knob at 7 that evening, and I will say this honestly because I owe the truth to all of them. It was beautiful. The light came sideways across the valley and lit the hayfields gold, and the far ridges stacked themselves into the haze, and Vincent stood on the end of the ledge with his arms out and shouted that his knees withdrew their complaint. Gloria counted us. 9. She said it out loud. 9. All present. Sandra set the camera on the rock. She pressed the timer and ran, laughing, and dropped down at the end of the line, and the shutter went. 10 of us are in that picture. We made camp at the flat ground past Campbell's shelter, in among the trees, with the fire ring in the middle and the tents in a loose ring around it. It was full night by 9. The sky was clear, and there was no moon to speak of, and the stars over that ridge were the kind you never see from a city, so thick they looked like spilled sugar. Walter did not put up his tent. He sat by the fire ring with his back against a log and his pack beside him, and he fed sticks into the flames one at a time, and he watched the tree line, not the fire. Everybody else watched the fire. Walter watched out. At 20 minutes past 11, something screamed. It came from downslope, from the direction of the fire road, maybe 300 yards out. It started low and climbed and broke at the top into a sound that I can only describe by telling you what it was not. It was not a bobcat, and I have heard bobcats. It was not a fox, and I have heard foxes, and I know exactly how much like a woman screaming a fox can sound. It was not an elk, and there are no elk on that mountain anyway. It went on for 11 seconds. I know because Crystal counted it, out loud, flat, the way she counts everything. When it stopped, the silence afterward had a shape to it. That is the only way I know to put it. Like the woods were holding still to see what we would do. Peter said, in a very small voice, "What was that?" Walter said, "Do not talk right now." 20 minutes later, it called Vincent's name. It used Gloria's voice. I want to be precise about this, because it is the part that people struggle with when I tell it. It was not an approximation. It was not close. It was Gloria Gonzalez, her exact pitch, her exact way of leaning on the second syllable, calling out from about 100 yards downslope in the pitch black. "Vincent, Vincent, come here." And Gloria was sitting 6 feet from me with both hands over her own mouth. Vincent stood up. That is the thing that still gets me. He stood up before he thought. The way you stand when somebody you know calls you, and he took 2 steps toward the sound before Walter came up off that log, faster than a 67-year-old man has any right to move, and put a hand flat on his chest. Walter said, "Sit down." The voice called again, "Vincent, Vincent, please." Then it called Peter. Then it called Sandra. It went down the line of us, and it used a different voice each time, and every single voice belonged to somebody sitting inside that ring of firelight. It called my name in Yasmin's voice while Yasmin sat 3 feet away with tears running down her face and her jaw clamped shut. It never called Walter. I have thought about that a great deal. Then Ethan stood up and said he was going to go look, because there was somebody out there in trouble, and it was probably a hiker who had heard our voices, and we were all sitting here scaring ourselves like children. He said it in a hard voice, an embarrassed voice. He took his headlamp. He would not take anybody with him. He said he would be 4 minutes, and he went down the slope, and the light of his lamp went sideways through the trunks, and then it was gone. He was gone for 51 minutes. Nobody spoke for most of it. Crystal got up twice to go after him, and I stopped her both times, and I will carry that. At around 1 in the morning, we saw a light coming back up through the trees, and Ethan walked into camp, and he sat down by the fire, and he said there was nothing out there. His headlamp was off. The light we had seen coming up the slope had been steady and white, and it had been coming from about the right height for a headlamp. And when he sat down, his lamp was in his hand, switched off, and the lens of it was cracked across. Crystal asked him if he was all right. He said he was fine. He said it in his own voice, in his own way, with a little flick of impatience at the end. He did not blink for the rest of that conversation. Not once. I counted, the way Crystal counts, because Crystal had gone very quiet and was staring at him across the fire. Later, when the others were in their tents, Walter and I sat up. He put a stick in the coals and he told me a story about a place near Chinle, Arizona, where he had worked a fence line one winter with a crew of local men, and about a night when the crew would not leave the truck. He said the men had a word for what was outside, and that he was not going to say the word, and that I should not ask him to. He said the rules were simple and old, and they did not care whether a person believed in them. Do not answer when it calls with a voice you love. Do not look it in the eyes, because that is how it learns you. Do not say its name, because saying the name is a door. And the last one, which he said while looking directly into the fire, if it gets close enough for long enough, it does not need to imitate you from outside anymore. It puts you on. I asked him what that meant. He said, "You already know what it means. You have been watching Ethan for an hour. If a story has ever put a cold hand on the back of your neck, do me a small kindness and leave a like before you go on, because these next chapters are the ones I have never been able to say out loud in a room with people in it. Gloria found the tent at 6:10 in the morning. Sandra Alexander's tent was zipped shut, zipped from the inside, both zippers pulled all the way down to the bottom of the door and meeting at the base, which is a thing you can only do from within. Her sleeping bag was flat, not rumpled, not thrown back. Flat, as though it had been smoothed by hand. Her boots were sitting side by side outside the door, laces tucked in, toes pointed neatly at the fire ring. Her camera was gone. We searched for 2 hours. We did it properly. I split us into pairs and set a whistle signal and kept everybody within earshot, and we quartered the ground around that campsite in widening loops. Peter kept calling her name until Walter told him to stop, and Peter asked why, and Walter said, "Because it can hear which name matters to you." Peter stopped calling. Yasmin found the track at the edge of the campsite, where the ground goes soft under the rhododendron. It was a deer track. A cloven print pressed deep into the mud, deeper than a deer should press, and behind it another, and behind that another, walking in a straight line away from camp. But the line was wrong. Deer walk in a rough braid, 2 front, 2 back. This was one print in front of the other in a single narrow file, the way a person walks a curb. 12 paces along, the prints changed. I do not know how else to say it. The cloven shape spread and opened and became a long-fingered hand pressed flat in the mud, and then another, and then the tracks were 4 wide and set in the pattern of something moving on all 4s with its arms far in front of its legs, and the span of them was so wide that when I knelt and stretched my own arms out, I could not reach from one side to the other. Crystal put her hand over her mouth. Vincent said, "That is a joke. Somebody up here is having a joke with us," and his voice cracked in the middle of the sentence. We followed them for 600 yards. They went uphill toward the rocks below the ridgeline, and then they stopped in the middle of clean, flat ground, not faded, not scuffed, stopped, mid-stride, as though whatever made them had gone straight up. We found Sandra at 11 that morning. She was standing about 40 yards off the trail on a steep bit of slope, facing a hickory tree, with her nose perhaps 2 inches from the bark. Her arms hung at her sides. Her feet were bare, and they were torn up badly, and she was standing on them as though they did not hurt at all. She was humming. Crystal reached her first and took her shoulders and turned her, and Sandra came around easily, and her face was slack and pleasant, and her eyes were open and did not track. Crystal checked her over the way she would in a bay at work, saying her name, asking her to squeeze fingers, checking her pupils with the little light on her keys. Sandra did all of it. She was compliant. She followed instructions, and she never once stopped humming, that same short phrase of 8 or 9 notes, over and over, in a tune I did not know then and which I have heard 3 times since in my own house. Then Sandra spoke. She said one sentence, in a perfectly normal conversational voice, still looking at nothing. She said, "It wanted to know which one of us is the one that counts." Gloria made a sound like she had been hit. We got Sandra between Vincent and Crystal and we started down. It was noon. It was full daylight. It was July, and the sun on the rock was hot enough that Peter's water bottle was warm to the touch, and I want you to hold on to that, because the next part happened in bright sun with 6 adults watching. We walked down for 50 minutes and came back to our own campsite. I checked the map, I checked my compass, and Peter checked his, and they agreed with each other, and both of them were pointing the way we had walked. We had walked south and slightly down, and the fire ring in front of us had Vincent's coffee cup sitting on the flat stone where he had left it. Ethan said we had gotten turned around. We had not gotten turned around. I have walked that ridge more than 40 times. We started again. We used the trail blazes this time, the white rectangles painted on the trunks, and we counted them out loud as we passed, and I made Yasmin keep a tally in Gloria's bird notebook. At blaze number 31, Yasmin stopped and said the number out loud twice, and then she showed me the page. She had made 31 marks, and at blaze 31, cut into the bark just under the white paint, there were 31 small scratches in 3 neat rows. Somebody, something, had been counting us as we passed. Vincent lost his composure then. He shouted into the trees. He called it every name he could think of and told it to come out and face men, and his voice went out across that hollow and came back off the rock. And when the echo came back, it was not his voice. It was Sandra's. And Sandra was standing right there beside me, humming, and her mouth was closed. We did not get off that mountain that day. By 6 in the evening we had circled back to the campsite twice more, and the light was going, and Walter said something I have never forgotten. He said, "It has not lost us, and it is not hunting us. It is keeping us." He said it is doing what a man does with a pen of animals, and it will start when it is ready and not before. We put everything we had into that campsite. We built the fire up until it was too big and too bright. We put the packs in a ring. Crystal wrapped Sandra's feet properly and sat with her and held her hand, and Sandra hummed, and every so often she would tilt her head at exactly the angle that deer on the switchback had tilted its head. Vincent Bryant died at around 9:30. He went to the edge of the firelight to relieve himself. He was gone 40 seconds. There was no scream. There was a single wet sound, the kind of sound a heavy branch makes when it comes down in a storm, and then nothing. Ethan said, "I will go." Crystal said, "No," and that was the first time Ethan Diaz smiled since he had come back up the slope the night before, and it was not a smile that any of us recognized, and Crystal saw it and I saw it, and neither of us said a word. We found Vincent in the morning. I am not going to describe him in detail, because his sister may one day hear this, and because there are things you cannot unsay once you have said them. I will tell you only 3 things. He was 15 feet up in the fork of an oak, folded into a space that a man his size could not have fit into if he had been alive and trying. He weighed 240 pounds, and there was no mark on the bark below him, no scrape, no gouge, nothing to say how he got up there, and his mouth was open and full of leaf litter, packed tight, as though something had needed him to be quiet. Gloria Gonzalez died at 11 that morning, and she died because of me. We were moving along the ridge toward Tinker Cliffs, because Walter said we should try a different direction entirely, and Gloria was second from the back. I heard my own voice behind us call her name. My own voice. I heard it come out of the woods 40 feet back and say, "Gloria, wait." I dropped the map. I turned around to say it was not me. I opened my mouth to tell her. And Gloria turned toward the sound with relief on her face and said, "Oh, thank goodness," and she stepped off the trail. She went 11 feet into the laurel, and the laurel closed, and she made one short sound, and then, for a moment, we heard her laughing. Gloria laughing, warm and easy, the way she had laughed on the ledge 2 evenings before. It went on for perhaps 5 seconds. Then it stopped in the middle, and something in the laurel said, in her exact voice, "Oh, thank goodness," and then said it again, and then said it again, faster each time, until it was not a sentence anymore, just a shape of sound being chewed. Peter fell down. He simply went down on his knees in the trail and put his hands over his ears. Yasmin started to walk toward the laurel. Crystal caught her by the pack strap and pulled her back so hard they both went into the dirt, and Yasmin screamed at her, screamed that Gloria was right there, screamed that we were leaving her. Walter got in front of Yasmin and took her face in both of his hands and said, "That is not her. That is a mouth that ate her voice. Do you understand me? That is a mouth." We were 6 then, counting Sandra, who had not stopped humming since the morning before. We got as far as the rocks at the north end of the ridge before we understood we were being herded. Every time we tried to descend, we found ourselves walking uphill again inside 20 minutes. The trail did not change. The blazes did not change. The compass did not change. It was the ground itself that did not agree with us anymore, and through all of it, Ethan Diaz walked at the back of our line and did not sweat. It was 91 degrees on that ridge. Peter was soaked through. My shirt was heavy with it. Ethan Diaz walked all day at the back of the line with a full pack in July heat, and his shirt was as dry as paper, and when Crystal handed him a bottle, he held it and turned it over in his hands and gave it back without drinking. That night, Crystal came and sat next to me and put her mouth right against my ear and said 4 words. She said, "Ethan came back wrong. We ran at first light. Walter planned it. He said the thing had rules, and the rules were about invitation, about answering, about being known. He said we had been standing still for 2 days letting it learn us, and that the only thing he had ever heard of that worked was to go fast and go loud and never once answer anything that spoke to us. He said one more thing while he was tightening Peter's hip belt for him, and he said it looking at me, not at Peter. He said, "When it comes, it will come as somebody you are glad to see." We went at 4 in the morning, before the sky was gray, down the switchbacks toward Route 311. Crystal took Sandra. Peter went second. I went third. Yasmin behind me. Ethan behind her, and Walter last, walking backward half the time. For 20 minutes there was nothing but our boots and our breathing. Then it started, and it came from every side at once. Gloria calling for help. Vincent laughing. My own voice, off to the left, saying my sister's name, and my sister has been dead since 2009, and there is no way on this earth that anything on that mountain should have known her name. It said it 4 times, and I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted iron, and I did not answer. At the second big switchback, Peter stopped so suddenly I ran into his pack. There was somebody standing in the trail below us. It was Ethan Diaz, standing in the middle of the path in the gray light with his headlamp in his hand and the lens cracked across, looking up at us, breathing hard, sweat running off his jaw and soaking through his shirt. And Ethan Diaz was standing behind Yasmin, 4 feet from me, dry as paper. Nobody moved. Nobody made a sound. The one on the trail below us said, in a voice absolutely wrecked with exhaustion and relief, "Oh God, you are all right. I have been looking for 2 days. I could not find the camp." And the one behind Yasmin said, in the same voice, at the same instant, in perfect unison, "Oh God, you are all right." Then it stopped pretending. I am not going to be able to give you this the way it was. I have tried in 4 years and I cannot. The thing that had been walking behind us since Tuesday night stood up. That is the closest I can come. It had been standing at the height of a man, and it went on standing, up and up, unfolding at joints that a body does not have, and the shape of Ethan slid off it the way a wet coat comes off a hanger. And what was underneath was gray and long, and had a face that was almost right, almost, made out of parts I recognized, and put together by something that had only ever seen a face from a distance. It looked at Yasmin, and Yasmin looked back at it, and I remember Walter's second rule, and I remember screaming at her not to, and she did not hear me, or she could not stop. Walter Russell stepped between them. He put his hands out. He did not fight it. He simply stood in the way with his back to us and said something in a language I did not know, 3 or 4 words, said flatly, the way a man reads a serial number off a part. And that thing hesitated. Walter turned his head and said, "Run," and that was the last word he spoke to anybody. We ran. The real Ethan was on his knees in the trail, and Crystal hauled him up by the collar without breaking stride, and we went down that mountain the way falling water goes down it. Peter fell twice. Sandra ran when we pulled her, and she hummed the entire way, and I could hear it under my own breathing, that same 8 or 9 notes. Behind us there was a sound I will not attempt to describe. We came out into the parking lot at Route 311 at 5:20 in the morning. There was a state trooper sitting in the lot with his engine running, because a hunter with a green pickup had reported 9 people going up on Saturday and none coming down, and because Gloria Gonzalez had a daughter who had called the sheriff's office 11 times. 5 of us walked out of the woods. Me, Peter Foster, Crystal Griffin, Ethan Diaz, and Yasmin Hayes, and Sandra Alexander, who walked out but who has never really come out, and who is in a facility outside Lynchburg to this day, where she stands and faces walls and hums and does not know her mother. They found Vincent Bryant in the oak on the 2nd day of the search. The report called it an animal predation event and did not attempt to explain the tree. They never found Gloria Gonzalez. They never found Walter Russell. 6 days of search dogs and 2 helicopters and 140 volunteers, and the dogs would not go past the rocks below the ridge line, and 1 handler quit that week and never came back, and I have his phone number, and I have never called it. I have never gone back to McAfee Knob. I have not gone back into any woods at all. Here is why I am telling you this, and then I am finished. 3 weeks ago, at around 2 in the morning, something came and stood at the edge of my yard where the light does not reach, and it called my name in Walter Russell's voice. It called it 11 times. It got the tiredness right. It got the flat way he said things right. It got everything right, and I lay on the floor of my own living room with my hands over my mouth until the sky turned gray, and I did not answer, and eventually it stopped. And this morning I opened that photograph again, the one from the ledge, the one with 10 figures in it. There are 11 now. The new one is at the right-hand end of the row, past Sandra. It is not crouching. It is standing behind me with its hands on my shoulders, and it is looking directly into the camera, and I have been staring at it all day trying to decide whether that face is nearly mine. If you are ever up on that ridge in the summer, and the birds have gone quiet, and something out in the trees calls you by the name your mother used, I need you to do exactly one thing. Keep your mouth shut, because it does not know you yet. It only knows what you answer to. Eight people signed the trail register at the Virginia Route 311 parking area on the morning of July the 11th. 7 of those entries can still be read. The 8th was scraped out of the paper with the point of a folding knife, and I am the one who scraped it, and by the time you reach the end of this you will understand why I could not stand to leave it sitting there in ink. I came to McAfee Knob for a photograph. That was the entire reason. There is a ledge up there that hangs out over the Catawba Valley like the prow of a ship, and if you get there early enough in July you can watch the fog break apart underneath you while the sun comes over the far ridge. I had seen that image on 100 calendars and I wanted my own version of it. That was the shape of my ambition that summer. A picture. Nothing more. The lot filled up fast. It always does. By 7 in the morning the shoulder along the highway was lined with cars, and the heat was already coming up off the asphalt in slow waves that made the far end of the guardrail wobble. Peter Foster was standing beside his truck with the tailgate down and 4 packs laid out in a row, and he was going through them one at a time like a man counting money. Peter was 37 that year. He had married my sister, and he had taken to the outdoors the way some men take to religion, all at once and very loudly, and he owned 3 of every item a person could possibly need. Sandra Alexander was sitting on the tailgate with her boots off, taping her heels before she had walked a single step. She worked with Peter and she was 33, and she had that particular flat way of looking at things that made you want to be careful about what you said around her. She had brought a camera as well, an old one that took actual film, and she told me on the drive over that digital pictures were lies told very quickly. I liked her immediately. Ethan Diaz came with Peter. He was 39, quiet, with forearms like cable, and he had spent 6 years on a survey crew out in New Mexico before he came back east to be near his mother. He said perhaps 4 sentences that whole morning. I want you to remember that about him, because later he was the one who did most of the talking, and I would give a great deal to go back to the version of that morning where Ethan Diaz had nothing to say. The shuttle van pulled in behind us at 7:15. Gloria Gonzalez drove it. She was 58, silver at the temples, and she ran a hostel down in Catawba where thru-hikers slept on bunks for $20 and got pancakes in the morning. She had been ferrying people to this lot for 11 years. She got out, put her hands on her hips, and looked at Peter's 4 packs, and then at the sky. "You are staying over," she said. It was not a question. 2 nights, Peter told her. Campbell's shelter tonight, then out over the Tinker Cliffs and back. Gloria did not answer right away. She looked past all of us, up the tree line where the trail cut in beside the road, and her mouth did something complicated. "Do not feed anything," she said finally. "I know that sounds like a poster. I am not talking about bears. If a deer comes into your camp and stands there and looks at you, do not stand there and look back. Pack up and walk." Sandra laughed. It was a short laugh and it died fast, because Gloria did not join it. "I have had 9 people come down off that ridge in 11 years, and not one of them could tell me a straight story about why they left in the middle of the night," Gloria said. 9 is a lot. 9 is more than you would think. She handed Peter a card with the hostel number on it. "Signal is thin on the ridge. It comes back in patches. If you get a bar, use it." Then she got in the van and drove away, and the 4 of us stood in the parking lot feeling the way you feel when someone tells you a thing you have no shelf to put on. There was one other vehicle worth mentioning. An older truck, faded blue, parked at the far end with the engine still ticking. An old man sat in the driver's seat with the window down and both hands on the wheel, and he had 2 hounds in the bed of it. The hounds were not moving. Hounds in a truck bed at a trailhead should be up and pacing and putting their heads over the side. These 2 were pressed flat against the cab, with their ears back and their eyes rolling, and neither of them made a sound. The old man's name was Walter Russell. He was 67 and he had grown up 8 miles from that lot. I know these things because I walked over to ask him whether he needed help, since he had been sitting there long enough that it seemed like the polite thing to do. He looked at me for a while before he answered. "You going up?" I told him we were. "Come down before full night," he said. "Not dusk. Before. There is a difference of about 40 minutes, and it matters more than anybody wants to hear." I asked him why. Walter Russell put his truck in gear. "Because 40 minutes ago my dogs were fine," he said, and he drove out onto the highway, and I stood in the heat with the taste of dust in my mouth, and I thought, there goes a man who has told that story too many times to people who laughed at it. We signed the register at the trailhead kiosk at 7:40. Peter wrote all 4 of our names because he had the pen. Underneath us, 4 more entries had been made earlier that morning. Vincent Bryant, age 55, section hiker out of Roanoke. Crystal Griffin, 43, no address given, and 2 more I did not read carefully at the time. I have thought about that kiosk more than I have thought about almost anything else in my life. A little wooden box on a post with a spiral notebook inside, swollen from humidity, full of the handwriting of strangers. Every person who goes up that mountain writes themselves into it. It is the most ordinary object in the world. We started climbing at 7:45. The trail out of Route 311 goes up in long switchbacks under oak and hickory, and the ground was still damp from a storm 2 nights before, and the air had that green closed-in smell that summer forests get when nothing has moved through them for a while. About 20 minutes in, Ethan stopped walking. He did not say anything. He just stopped and turned his head and looked off the left side of the trail into a stand of young poplar where the light came down in narrow bars. I looked too. There was a deer standing in there, maybe 40 feet off, a doe with her head lowered. That was all. A deer in a forest in Virginia. I opened my mouth to make a joke about it. Then the doe raised her head, and she kept raising it, and the neck came up further than a neck is built to come up, until the head was above the level of the lowest poplar branches, and the eyes were pointed down at us, from a height no deer in the state of Virginia has ever stood at. It held that. For 4 seconds it held that. Then it lowered, and turned, and walked into the trees without any sound at all, and the young poplars did not move where it passed through them. Ethan Diaz started walking again. He did not look at me, but his hand had gone to the strap of his pack and it stayed there, gripping, and it stayed there for the next 2 miles. We told ourselves it was a trick of the light. That is what people do. The human mind is a machine for filing things away, and if a thing will not fit in any of the drawers, the mind simply widens a drawer until it does. Sandra had not seen it. She had been ahead on the trail. When I described it, she said, flatly, that the perspective in a forest is unreliable, that a deer standing on a hidden rise looks impossible from below, and that I should have taken a picture instead of standing there with my mouth open. She was right about the last part. I have thought about that too. Peter did not want to discuss it because Peter had a schedule. He had printed the schedule. He had it laminated. The climb to the knob is not brutal, but it is long, and by 10 in the morning the heat had crawled in under the canopy and settled. My shirt was soaked through. Cicadas came up in waves, that dry, rising scream they make, and then all at once they would stop, everywhere, at the same instant. And the silence that dropped into the space where they had been was so complete that you could hear the blood in your own ears. That happened 4 times before noon. Cicadas do not do that. They fade, they trade off, they answer each other. They do not all quit in the same half-second across an entire hillside as if something had walked through and put a hand over the mouth of the woods. We caught up to Vincent Bryant at the ladder. There is a section on that trail where the path goes up through a cleft in the rock, and someone has set in wooden steps, and he was sitting at the top of it, with his boots off and his socks drying on a stone. 55, gray beard trimmed close, the wiry build of a man who has been walking sections of that trail for 20 years and has nothing left to prove to anyone. He looked at us for a moment too long before he said hello. You 4 came up together? Peter said that we had. Vincent nodded slowly and pulled his socks off the stone. Then who is behind you? We turned around. There was nothing on the trail behind us. Green shade and the wooden steps and a chipmunk on a root. Somebody has been 30 yards back of me since the John Spring shelter, he said. Every time I stop, they stop. Every time I go, they go. 2 hours of that. I stepped off the trail and let them pass, and nobody passed. He laced his boots without hurrying. I figured it was one of yours. None of us said anything. Well, Vincent said, and stood up and hoisted his pack. I would take it as a kindness if I could walk with you all a while. So we became 5. We reached the knob a little after 1 in the afternoon, which is the worst time of day to be there and the best time to understand why people come. The overhang juts out over nothing. You walk out onto that flat lip of stone, and the valley opens under you, thousands of feet of ridge and farmland and haze. And the wind comes up the face of the mountain and hits you in the chest like something with a will behind it. There were a dozen other people up there taking turns sitting on the edge for pictures. Crystal Griffin was one of them. 43, sunburned across the nose, hiking alone with a pack half the size of Peter's. She had her boots off and her feet hanging over 2,000 feet of open air, and she was eating an apple as though she were at a kitchen table. She and Sandra fell into conversation the way solo travelers do, and by the time the crowd thinned toward 3 o'clock, it had somehow been decided that Crystal would come with us as far as Campbell Shelter. 6. Sandra shot a roll of film up there. I shot maybe 200 frames. The light was flat and hazy and I knew none of it was any good. But I kept shooting because that is what you do when you have carried a camera for 6 miles. I have looked at those 200 frames more times than any person should look at anything. In 196 of them, there is a valley, a rock, and my friends. In 4 of them, taken between 1:19 and 1:21 in the afternoon, there is something standing in the tree line about 60 yards back from the overhang, in the shade where the rhododendron gets thick. It is upright. It is taller than the rhododendron. In the first frame, it is facing away. In the second and third frames, it is facing the camera, and there is a suggestion of a long face and something above the face that could be branches behind it or could be attached to it. In the fourth frame, the tree line is empty, and the rhododendron on either side of where it stood is bent outward, both directions at once, as if something had gone through the gap sideways and very fast. I did not see any of this on the mountain. I saw it 4 months later on a screen in my apartment at 2 in the morning, and I sat perfectly still for a long time. We left the knob at 4 and started north for the shelter. The trail runs along the top of the ridge there, easy walking, the ground gone soft with old leaf litter. The light came through sideways and gold. It should have been the best hour of the trip. At 4:45, Sandra called my name from behind us. I turned around. Sandra was in front of me. She had been in front of me for 10 minutes. She had turned around too, and she was looking at me, and her face had gone the color of paper. The voice came again. It came from perhaps 50 yards back down the trail, from the left, from the low ground under the ridge. It said my name a second time, and it got the pitch of her voice exactly right. The little upward hook she put on the end of a word when she was about to make a joke at my expense. The third time it said my name, it was closer, and it was wrong. Not wrong in the way a bad impression is wrong. Wrong in the way a recording is wrong when the machine is running slightly slow. The vowels dragged. The word came out with too much air behind it, as if whatever was making it had a great deal more lung than a person has and was not entirely certain how much to use. Vincent Bryant said, very quietly and without turning his head, "Nobody answer that." Nobody did. We walked. We walked at a speed that was not quite running because running would have made it real. And behind us and below us on the slope something kept pace with us for 11 minutes, and every so often it tried my name again in Sandra's voice, and each time it was a little better than the time before. If you have made it this far into what happened to us, do me one small favor and leave a like on this, because the algorithm buries stories like this one, and there are people out there who need to hear it before they load a pack. Then stay with me. The night was still ahead of us. Campbell Shelter sits back off the trail in a hollow with a spring and a privy and a 3-sided wooden lean-to with a sleeping platform. There were 2 people already there when we came in at 6:20. Walter Russell was one of them. I stopped walking when I saw him. He was sitting on the edge of the platform with a cup of coffee and both hounds lying at his feet, and he had come up the fire road on the far side, and he looked at me with an expression that had no surprise in it whatsoever. "I told you before full night," he said. "You told me 40 minutes. I did." He drank his coffee. "It is 6:15. You have got about 2 hours and 40 minutes, and then it will not matter what I told you." The other person there was Yasmin Hayes, 51, a volunteer with the Ridge Runner program, who spent her summers hiking between shelters, checking on water sources, and reminding people not to burn trash in fire rings. She had a radio on her hip. She had been out for 5 days. She was the most reassuring human being I have ever met, right up until about 10 that night. So there were 8 of us in that hollow. Me, Peter Foster, Sandra Alexander, Ethan Diaz, Vincent Bryant, Crystal Griffin, Walter Russell, Yasmin Hayes, 2 dogs, 1 spring, 1 wooden shelter with 3 walls and 1 open side, and the open side faced the trees. We cooked. We talked. Peter told the story of the deer as a funny story and got a laugh out of Crystal, and Vincent told the story of being followed and got no laugh at all, and Yasmin wrote something in a small notebook and did not comment. Walter Russell said nothing through any of it. He fed his hounds by hand and kept looking at the gap in the trees where the trail came in. At 8:30, Ethan Diaz finally spoke. He said, "It walks on 4 legs when it wants to cover ground and on 2 when it wants to look at you." Everyone stopped. "Out west," Ethan said, on the survey crew. "We were running lines across a lot of country that belonged to people who did not want us there, and I do not blame them. There were nights we were told to stay in the trucks. Not warned, told. And one of the men on that crew, who had grown up out there, gave me a rule and made me repeat it back to him until I had it right. What was the rule? Sandra said. Do not say what you saw out loud in the open air, and never, under any circumstance, answer it when it calls you. He turned his cup in his hands. There is a word for it out there. It is not my word. It belongs to people whose land that is and whose word it is, and I have never been sure I have the right to use it. But the crew used it, and they were not being clever, and every one of them was afraid. They called it a skinwalker. Vincent Bryant said, This is Virginia. I know where we are. Walter Russell set his cup down on the platform. My grandfather did not call it that, he said. The whole hollow went quiet for him. He did not call it anything, mostly. When it was around, he would say the woods have gone empty, and that was the only warning we got, and we knew to come inside. And I will tell you what he told me one time when he had been drinking, which was the only time he ever told me anything. He said the reason you do not shoot at it is that it wants you to. He said it wears things. He said his brother went out in 1952 after a deer that was standing in the corn at midnight looking at the house, and what came back to the door at 4 a.m. knew his brother's whistle and his brother's cough and the way his brother knocked, and it stood out there for 2 hours doing all three. And my grandfather sat in the kitchen with a rifle in his lap and never opened the door. Crystal Griffin said, That is a horrible story. It is my family's story, Walter said. And I have never told it to a stranger before tonight, and I am telling it now because you are 8 people in a shelter with one open wall, and I do not think you understand what you have walked into the middle of. The cicadas stopped, all of them, across the whole hollow, in the space of half a second, like a switch. Every one of us heard it happen. Yasmin Hayes stood up slowly. Both hounds came up off the boards and pressed themselves against Walter's legs and started to shake so hard I could hear their tags rattling. For about 90 seconds there was nothing at all, not one insect, not one frog from the spring, not one leaf. Then, from somewhere out past the privy, a woman started crying. It was a terrible sound, not screaming, weeping, exhausted, the way somebody weeps in the 4th hour of the worst night of their life. And it was coming from maybe 80 yards out in the trees, and it was moving slowly left to right along the edge of the hollow. Crystal Griffin was on her feet before anyone could stop her, calling out, asking if somebody was hurt. The weeping stopped instantly. And then it came back in Crystal's voice, asking if somebody was hurt, using her exact words, matching her pitch and her breath and the little crack her voice had made on the word hurt. Crystal sat down on the boards very slowly, like a woman lowering herself into cold water, and she put both hands over her mouth, and she did not take them away for a long time. Yasmin got on the radio. She raised the county dispatch on the 3rd try and gave our position, and said she had a group of 8 with a possible person in distress, and requested that somebody note the time. The voice on the other end asked her to repeat the group number. 8, she said. 8 adults, 2 dogs, at Campbell Shelter. There was a pause on the line. Then dispatch said, and I am quoting this as exactly as I can remember it, Copy 8. Be advised, we have a caller from your location logged at 1955 requesting assistance. Are you aware of that caller? It was 9:10. Nobody had called at 5 to 8. Yasmin's radio had been the only radio. She asked for the name on the log. Dispatch read out a name. It was my name. Nobody slept. I want to be clear that nobody slept, because what happened later has been explained to me by careful people as a shared exhaustion event, and I have learned to nod when they say it. We built the fire up higher than the ring was meant to hold. Walter did not object. He sat with his back against the shelter wall and a rifle across his knees that I had not seen him carry in, and he did not raise it once all night, and I understood that this was deliberate. The thing came around 3 times. The first time it walked the perimeter of the hollow at a steady pace, and we could hear its feet in the leaf litter, and the sound was wrong in a specific way that I have never been able to explain to anyone who was not there. It was 4 beats, then 2 beats, then 4 again. The rhythm changed while it was moving. Nothing changes the number of legs it is using in the middle of a walk. The second time it stood still, somewhere out past the spring, and made a sound like a man clearing his throat, over and over, perhaps 40 times, practicing. The third time it used Peter's voice, and it used it from directly behind the back wall of the shelter, 6 feet from where Peter was lying, and it said, "Hey, hey, open your eyes." Hey, Peter Foster did not open his eyes. He lay on the boards with his fists closed and tears running sideways down into his ears. 37 years old, and Sandra Alexander held onto the back of his shirt with both hands like she was holding a boat to a dock. At some point after 4 in the morning, it left. The frogs came back at the spring first, then the insects. Nobody said anything for a long time. Gray light came into the hollow around 5:40. We packed in silence, and we were on the trail by 6. The plan, made in about 11 words, was to go straight back the way we came, past the knob, down the switchbacks, out to Route 311, and never in this life to return. Walter took his hounds down the fire road. He shook my hand before he went, and he said, "It has got your name now. You be careful what answers to it." Then he was gone, and I have not seen him since, and I have tried. 7 of us went south on the ridge. It was a clear morning. That is the part that undoes people when I tell it. Full sun, blue sky, 72 degrees, birds going in the canopy. We walked for 1 hour and 40 minutes on a trail we had covered the day before, a trail with white blazes painted on the trees every 100 yards, the most walked footpath on the entire East Coast. And at 7:40 we came into the hollow at Campbell Shelter. Vincent Bryant stopped in the trail. He got out his map and his compass, and he stood there for a long moment, and then he said, "We have been going south." We had. The sun had been on our left the whole time. I had watched it there. Sandra had watched it there. We tried again. We walked south for 50 minutes and came out at the shelter. We tried the fire road that Walter had taken, and it ran downhill for a 1/4 of a mile and ended at a gate with a chain on it. And past the gate was leaf litter and standing timber and no road at all. And Yasmin Hayes, who had been walking that ridge for 6 summers, put her hand on the gatepost and said, "There is no gate on this road." Peter began to come apart around 10 in the morning. It started with him talking too much, and it ended with him sitting down in the middle of the trail and refusing to move, and it took Ethan and me both to get him up. At 11, Crystal Griffin went behind a laurel thicket to relieve herself. She was gone 90 seconds. Then she called out, from behind the thicket, in her own voice, asking Sandra to come and give her a hand. Sandra started forward. Ethan Diaz caught her by the arm and did not let go, and Sandra fought him. And I want to be honest and say that I stood there and did nothing, because I did not know which of the 2 possible mistakes was the worst one to make. Then Crystal Griffin walked out from behind the laurel on the far side, 40 feet from where the voice had come from, still buckling her belt, saying, "What? What is it? Why are you all looking at me like that?" And from behind the thicket, her voice said the same thing at the same moment, a half-second behind her, like an echo that had learned the words in advance. We ran. All 6 of us ran, and Peter ran better than any of us, and we came out into the open at McAfee Knob at 20 past 12 in the afternoon with our lungs burning and our legs shaking, and there was not one other person up there. On a Saturday in July. On the most photographed overlook on the Appalachian Trail. Not one. Vincent Bryant walked out onto the ledge and looked down at the valley for a long time, and then he said the thing that I still hear when I am trying to fall asleep. "The haze is not moving." It was not. The clouds over Catawba Valley were exactly where they had been the day before. The same shapes, the same holes in them, 2,000 feet of sky, holding perfectly still, like a photograph of weather. Yasmin Hayes got on her radio and got nothing at all, not even static. And then, after about a minute, she got a voice. It was mine. It was calm and it was pleasant, and it was saying, "We are all fine here. We are coming down now. There are 7 of us. Tell them there are 7 of us." I was standing 6 feet from her with my own mouth shut. I do not know how long we were on that ridge. I know what the calendar says. The calendar says we left the trailhead on the morning of July the 11th and came off the mountain on the evening of July the 12th, 36 hours, an ordinary overnight trip. I know that we ate everything we had brought for 3 days. I know that Sandra Alexander shot 4 rolls of 36 exposure film and had none left. I know that my beard came in. Vincent Bryant is the reason we got out. When the trails would not work, he stopped trying to use them. He put the compass away, and he said that if the mountain would not let us go down the front of it, we would go down the back of it, off trail, through the laurel, straight at the steepest fall line we could find, and we would not stop for anything, and we would not answer anything. It took 4 hours, and it was the worst 4 hours of my life. Laurel hells on that ridge grow so thick you crawl through them on your hands and knees in a green tunnel with no sky, and the whole way down, on both sides of us, something moved through the thicket without touching it. It talked the entire time. It used every voice it had collected. It used Crystal's voice to say she had fallen. It used Walter Russell's voice to tell us to come back to the fire road. It used the voice of a child, which none of us had heard on that mountain at any point, and that was the one that made Yasmin Hayes start to weep as she crawled. And at the very end, when we could hear traffic through the trees, it used Peter's wife's voice, my sister's voice, from a woman who was at that moment 400 miles away in Ohio. It said, "Peter, honey, you are going the wrong way." Peter Foster kept crawling. He kept crawling, and he said, over and over, not to it and not to us, but to himself, "That is not her. That is not her. That is not her." We came out of the trees onto the shoulder of Route 311 at 7:40 in the evening, 600 yards north of the parking area, and the sound of the first car going past was the most beautiful thing I have ever heard. Here is where it ends, and here is where it does not. We walked down the shoulder to the lot. Peter's truck was there. Vincent's car was there. The lot was full of ordinary people in ordinary clothing, loading dogs and children into their vehicles, and the sun was going down orange behind the ridge. And Yasmin Hayes went straight to her vehicle and got on a real radio and reported us in. She reported 6 people out, and dispatch said, "Copy 6 out. We show 7 in the party." We stood in that parking lot in the last of the light, and we counted ourselves out loud. Me, Peter Foster, Sandra Alexander, Ethan Diaz, Vincent Bryant, Crystal Griffin, 6. We counted 3 times. 6, every time. Then Vincent Bryant walked over to the kiosk and opened the register. Our 4 names were there from the morning of the 11th, in Peter's handwriting. Vincent's name was there. Crystal Griffin's name was there. Yasmin's entry from her ridge run was there. And below all of them, dated July the 12th, timed at 12:20 in the afternoon, which was the exact minute we had come out onto that empty overlook and found the sky holding still, there was one more entry. It was my name. It was in my handwriting. Not similar to my handwriting. Mine. The way I looped the bottom of the last letter and run it back under the word. The way I have signed everything since I was 15 years old. Under the column marked destination, it said, "Going back up." I took out my knife and I scraped that line off the page until there was a hole in the paper. Sandra took a photograph of me doing it, and she has never shown it to me, and I have never asked to see it. That was 3 years ago. Vincent Bryant sold his gear and has not walked a trail since. Crystal Griffin moved to Arizona, and we exchange messages twice a year, and neither of us ever mentions Virginia. Yasmin Hayes left the Ridge Runner program and works at a garden center and told me once, on the phone, that she still checks the log at dispatch some nights for calls from locations where nobody is standing. Ethan Diaz will not discuss it at all. Peter Foster and my sister moved to Ohio, and Peter has not been alone outdoors after sunset in 3 years, and at Thanksgiving he drinks too much and looks at me across the table like he is checking something. I understand why he checks. I have thought about it every day, because here is the last of it, and then I am finished. 2 months ago my phone rang at 4 in the morning. Unknown number. I answered it, which was a mistake, and I have made a study of my mistakes, and that one belongs near the top. There was wind on the line. The particular sound wind makes when it comes up the face of a mountain and hits an overhang of rock and goes over the top of it. I know that sound. I stood in it. I photographed in it. And then something said my name. It got it perfectly right. 3 years of practice will do that. It said my name, and it waited. And when I did not answer, it said the only other thing it has ever needed to say to me. It said, "You left before we finished. I have not been back to Virginia. I do not intend to go. But I have started to notice that the woods behind my own house go quiet sometimes, all at once, every insect in the same half-second. And when that happens, I go inside and I lock the door and I sit in the kitchen and I do not open it for anything. My grandfather's generation would have had a phrase for it. The woods have gone empty. If you are ever on a ridge somewhere and you hear a person you love calling to you from a direction they cannot possibly be in, I need you to understand something. Whatever else you do, whatever it costs you, however certain you are, do not answer. It only needs to hear your voice once. Nine of us walked up to McAfee Knob on the first Saturday in July. 9 of us walked back down on Monday morning. I need you to hold those 2 sentences in your head before I tell you anything else, because on paper they mean that everybody came home. That is exactly what the report says. A deputy wrote it out on the hood of his cruiser in the gravel lot on Route 311 while the heat came up off the road in slow waves. 9 hikers up, 9 hikers down, no injuries, no further action required. I have read that page so many times that I can see the shape of his handwriting when I close my eyes. And every single time, I want to reach through the paper, take the pen out of that man's hand, and tell him that the ninth thing walking down the mountain with us was not a person, and that one of us never left the ridge at all. We were not strangers, and we were not tourists. That is the part people never understand when I try to explain it. Most of us met on a trail maintenance crew, hauling rock and cutting back the laurel in the Jefferson National Forest, and the trip had become a habit that outlived the reason for it, 10 summers running. Same weekend, same mountain. Vincent Bryant, 55 years old, ran the whole thing off a spreadsheet he refused to let anyone else touch, right down to who was carrying the stove fuel. Gloria Gonzalez, 58, had taught 4th grade for 31 years and packed food for twice the number of people we actually had, which nobody ever complained about. Crystal Griffin, 43, worked as a paramedic in Roanoke and carried a trauma kit that weighed more than her sleeping bag. Sandra Alexander, 33, was the fastest of all of us and hated waiting. Ethan Diaz, 39, was up there to scout ridge lines for the fall season and could read a track in mud the way the rest of us read road signs. Yasmin Hayes, 51, brought 2 cameras and a small motion-triggered game camera she liked to strap to a tree overnight because she had a theory that bears came through the campsite and nobody believed her. Peter Foster was 37, and Peter was the reason the trip happened at all. Some groups have a person who holds them together with nothing but noise and generosity, and that was him. He talked the entire way up every year. He carried other people's water when they got tired and never mentioned it afterward. And then there was Walter Russell, 67, who had been walking this section since 1974, back when you could go up on a July weekend and see nobody at all. Walter did not talk much. Walter watched. I was the one with the maps and the permit and the head count. That is my job on every trip I have ever taken, and it started as a joke and turned into a habit I could not put down. Every water break, every trail junction, every time we stopped to let somebody tighten a boot, I would look down the line and count, 1 through 9. It takes 2 seconds. Nobody notices you doing it. I want you to remember that, because it is the only reason I am alive. We stopped at the general store in Catawba on the way in, the way we always did, for ice and bad coffee. The man behind the counter knew Vincent by name. He asked where we were headed and Vincent told him, and the man nodded slowly and said that 3 dogs had gone missing out of the valley since May, all of them from properties along the same stretch of road, and that a farmer up the way had lost 2 calves and found nothing left of them worth burying. Then he said something I did not think about again for another 30 hours. He said that people had stopped using the old logging cut off the fire road, and that he could not tell us why, only that nobody used it anymore. Walter had been picking through a shelf of batteries, and I watched him stop with his hand halfway to the rack and stay stopped for maybe 4 seconds too long. Then he put the batteries in the basket and walked outside without buying his coffee. The lot on 311 was full by noon. It always is. McAfee Knob is the most photographed spot on the entire Appalachian Trail, and in July you share that ledge with strangers from 4 states. We crossed the road, went up the wooden steps, over the little footbridge, and started climbing through air so thick and hot it felt like breathing through a wet cloth. Cicadas everywhere. Peter singing something with the words wrong on purpose, Gloria laughing at him. It was, for about an hour and a half, the best day of that whole summer. Then we passed John's spring shelter, and the woods went quiet. Not gradually. I have spent my whole life in these mountains, and I know how a forest hushes when a hawk crosses over, that soft rolling pause that moves through the trees and then fills back in behind it. This was not that. This was a wall. We walked from a wall of cicada noise into a silence so total that I could hear the strap of Sandra's pack rubbing on her shoulder 6 feet in front of me. 9 people stopped walking at almost the same moment, without anybody saying a word. Crystal said it first. She said that the bugs had stopped. Ethan turned a slow circle, and I saw his hand drift back toward his hip without any thought behind it. He said that the bugs do not all stop. He said birds go up, squirrels go around, but the bugs do not all stop at once unless something is moving through that they all agree about. That was when the smell reached us. Wet copper, like a handful of old coins, sitting on top of something sweet and turned and rotten. It came in on no wind at all, which is a thing I still cannot make sense of, and it was gone again in under a minute. Sandra was the one who saw the deer. It was standing in a laurel thicket maybe 40 feet off the trail, a young doe, and it was looking straight at us. Deer do that. That is not strange. What was strange is that it did not move at all. Not the ears, not the tail, not the loose flicker of skin that runs along a deer's flank when the flies are on it, and the flies were on it. I could see them crawling at the corner of its eye. It stood there like something that had been put down in the woods rather than born in them. And when Peter clapped his hands twice to spook it, the head turned toward the sound, and the body did not turn with it. The whole neck rotated, and the shoulders stayed square to us, and it held that way, watching, until Vincent said we were moving on, and everybody agreed too quickly. 20 minutes later, Ethan crouched at the edge of a wet seep where a spring crossed under the trail, and he stayed crouched long enough that I went back to see what he had. There was a hoof print in the mud, a clean one, sharp-edged, fresh. And then the one in front of it was half a hoof, the front of it opening out and spreading, and the one in front of that was not a hoof at all. It was a hand. Long, narrow, 5 fingers splayed wide, pressed deepest at the tips as though whatever made it had pushed off hard. The stride between prints was longer than any of us could have jumped. Ethan did not say anything. He put his palm down next to the print without touching it, and his hand looked like a child's hand. Then he stood up, wiped his palm on his shorts twice, and walked back to the group and told them it was elk sign, which was a lie, because there are no elk on that mountain. We reached the knob a little before 7, and for a while I let myself believe the day had corrected itself. That ledge earns everything anyone says about it. Sandstone juts straight out over the Catawba Valley like the prow of a ship, and the farmland goes golden green all the way to Tinker Cliffs across the way, and the light in July comes in low and sets the whole valley on fire. Yasmin took the group picture. Gloria cried a little, the way she always did. Peter sat on the very lip with his boots hanging over 1,100 feet of open air because he knew it made Vincent furious. I counted 9. We were packing up when Walter's hand closed around my wrist. He did not look at me. He was looking down and to the left, below the ledge, where the mountain falls away into a jumble of sandstone boulders and stunted trees that nobody walks through because there is no reason to walk through it. Something was moving down there, something upright, going between the rocks, unhurried, its arms hanging past where a person's arms should end, its head riding lower than its shoulders. It was maybe 200 feet below us, and it was, I am certain of this, taller than any man I have ever stood next to. I opened my mouth and Walter's grip tightened until it hurt. He said, very quietly, without moving his lips much at all, "Do not point at it, and do not say out loud what you are seeing." By the time I looked again, there was nothing between the boulders but shadow pooling in the gaps, and the others were laughing about something behind us, and the sun was going down over the valley like it did not know a thing. Camping is not allowed on the knob itself, so we did what everyone does and pushed on another half-mile to the pig farm campsite, a flat shelf of ground under old chestnut oaks where the ground is packed hard from 40 years of tents. Campbell Shelter and the Bear Cables sit a little further on. There were 2 other groups in there when we arrived, a father with 2 teenagers and a pair of thru-hikers heading north, and I remember being glad about that. 9 felt thin on that mountain by then. 13 felt better. We built a fire we did not need in that heat, and Gloria fed everyone twice. Vincent went around checking that food bags were hung. Yasmin wandered off with her game camera and strapped it to a chestnut oak at the low edge of the site, aimed back at our tents, because she was still chasing her bear. Peter did impressions. He was terrible at them, and that was the joke. He did Vincent reading out the packing list. He did Walter saying nothing for a full minute, which even Walter laughed at. I have thought a great deal about how much of that evening was watched. The first sound came at full night, once the fire had burned down to a low orange bed and half of us were already in tents. A whip-poor-will started up in the trees south of camp. If you have spent any time in Virginia in the summer, you know that call in your bones, 3 notes, over and over, endlessly, until you want to throw a boot at it. Except the rhythm was wrong. It was too slow, and then it was too fast, and then it broke apart in the middle and started again from the second note, like something reading the sound off a page rather than singing it. Crystal sat up in her chair and asked, in a small voice, whether birds got sick. The whip-poor-will stopped, and then a baby started crying. Out there, on a ridge, 4 miles from the nearest road, past 10 at night, a baby was crying in the laurel, about 60 feet from our fire. It went on for maybe 15 seconds. Sandra was already standing. She had that look people get when a sound reaches the part of them that does not consult the rest. and she took 2 steps toward it before Ethan caught her arm and held on. Ethan said it was a bobcat. He said it flat and hard, the way you say a thing you are trying to make true, and I saw his face in the firelight and he did not believe it either. Then the crying cut off, mid-breath, the way a recording stops, and Gloria's voice came out of the trees. She was sitting 8 feet from me with a cup of tea in her hands. I was looking directly at her. Her mouth was closed, and from the tree line, from a place well up the slope, her voice called out Sandra's name, not a shout. That warm, tired, patient way she had of calling a kid back from the far end of a playground, with the second syllable stretched out long. Sandra answered, "I do not blame her. I want that on the record." She had half a breath out, and the first sound of Gloria's name forming when Walter came up out of his camp chair, faster than a man of 67 has any right to move, and put his hand flat over her mouth. He held it there. He looked around at every one of us, and the fire was in his eyes, and he said, "Keep your voices down and listen to me." Then he gave us the rules. Do not answer anything that calls to you from outside the light. Do not use each other's names out loud any more than you have to, and never shout one. Do not whistle if something whistles at you. If you hear a voice you know coming from a place that voice cannot be, you do not investigate it, and you do not name it out loud. And whatever else happens, nobody walks out of this camp alone tonight, not for water, not to relieve themselves, not for anything. Vincent, who had spent all day being the man in charge, asked what exactly Walter thought was out there. Walter said, "Not tonight." He said, "If I put a name on it tonight, none of you will sleep, and you are going to need whatever sleep you can steal." Nobody argued. That is the part that tells you everything about how that night felt. 8 adults, several of them stubborn, and not one of us argued with the old man. The other groups were gone in the morning, both of them. Packed out in the night, the thru-hikers first. We heard them go. I got into my tent around midnight and lay on top of my bag with my boots still on because taking them off felt like a decision I might regret. And a little after 3, something walked a circle around our camp. I do not mean it passed by. I mean it walked a slow, deliberate ring around the whole site, and it kept the same distance the entire way, and it stepped on sticks. That is the detail that has never let go of me. A deer breaks brush. A bear crashes. This thing walked with long, silent pauses in between, and then placed a foot down on something that would snap, and then paused again, and I understood with a horrible clarity that it was not being careless. It was letting us know the size of the circle. It went around 3 times. I counted, because counting is what I do, and because if I stopped counting, I was going to start screaming. On the 3rd pass, it stopped behind my tent. The wall came in against my back. Just a light pressure, the fabric bowing in, the way it does when a person leans a knee into it. Then there was a sound at the seam by my head, a long, slow drawing in of air, 3 times, working its way from my feet up toward my face, close enough that the nylon moved with each breath. And then Peter said my name. Peter was asleep 6 feet away in the next tent with his mouth open, snoring like a chainsaw with a bad plug, and I could hear him doing it. And at the same moment Peter's voice was outside my tent saying my name softly, once, and then waiting. Then saying it again with a little laugh in it, the way he actually did, the way that made it sound like whatever came next was going to be funny. I did not answer. I put both hands over my own mouth and held them there until my jaw ached, and I lay in the pitch black listening to my friend's voice ask me twice more to come outside. At some point it stopped, and I did not sleep again. In the gray light before 6, I got out and found Ethan already up, standing at the edge of the site with his back to camp, and his arms crossed so tight his knuckles were white. Down at the seep where we drew water, in the black mud, there were 3 hoof prints, then a 4th that was half open, then a hand, 12 inches from wrist crease to fingertip, pressed deep. And the vestibule of Peter's tent had been unzipped in the night, all the way to the bottom, and folded back and laid flat, neat as a made bed. His boots were still sitting there. His food was still in his pack. Nothing had been taken. Something had simply opened the door and looked in at him for a while. If you are still walking with me at this point, do me one favor and leave a like on this before we go any further, because the next stretch is where I stopped being able to explain anything, and I would like to know that somebody is still on the trail behind me. We decided to leave. That decision took about 4 minutes, and there was no vote. Vincent said we were going down. Crystal was already breaking her tent, and even Sandra, who had never quit anything in her life, was rolling her pad without a word. It should have taken us 2 hours. Pig farm to the knob down the ridge, past the shelters, over the fire road, down through the switchbacks, out to the lot, 4 miles, downhill. Any of us could do it half asleep, and most of us had. We walked for 90 minutes and came back to our own campsite, not a similar place, ours. Vincent's tent stake, the one he had bent and left in the ground, was still there. The ring of ash was still warm. 9 people had walked south along a trail marked every 100 yards with white blazes painted on the trees, in daylight, in good weather, and we had arrived back where we started without a single one of us noticing a turn. Sandra said we must have taken the blue blaze at the shelter. Ethan said there was no blue blaze that loops. Vincent got the map out and his hands were shaking so badly he could not hold it flat, and I remember Gloria putting one hand over his to stop it. Yasmin was the one who found the boot prints. In the soft dirt at the north end of the site, going away from camp, there was a line of our own tread patterns from the morning, and laid down directly on top of them, going the same direction, one long bare footprint, high-arched, with toes that were far too long. We tried again, and that time we made it as far as a fallen chestnut oak that none of us remembered passing, and then Ethan smelled it before the rest of us did, and told everybody to stop. I am going to describe what was in that clearing once, and then I am going to move on. 7 deer, hung in the laurel in a rough circle, spaced almost evenly, at about the height of a man's chest. Skinned, every one of them, so carefully that Ethan said out loud that he had never in 20 years seen a hide come off that clean, and he had taken plenty. The hides themselves were not there, and every single head had been turned around on the neck so that all 7 faces pointed outward, away from the center of the ring, toward the trail we were standing on. The flies were so loud in that clearing it sounded like an engine. Crystal, who has scraped people off the interstate for a living, got down on her knees and was sick. Yasmin lifted her camera on instinct and took 2 frames and then said she was deleting them, and she did, and that night both of them were still on the card. She showed me. She had deleted them twice by then. We went back to the campsite because there was nowhere else to be, and while we sat there in the middle of the afternoon not looking at each other, Yasmin remembered the game camera on the chestnut oak. She brought it back and we crowded around the little screen, and I have never wanted so badly to be somewhere else than in that circle of shoulders. Frame 1, 3:11 in the morning. A shape crouched at the low edge of camp, near the fire ring, folded up small. It filled about 1/3 of the frame. Its knees were up beside its head and its head was on backward on its shoulders and it was looking at the tents. Frame 2, 3:12. The same shape, closer, upright now, most of it out of frame. What was in frame was the lower half of a face that was mostly bone and the long line of an arm, and the arm ended in fingers. Frame 3, 3:14. A face pressed up against the lens, so close it was nothing but texture, and one eye set higher on that face than any eye is set on any living thing. And frame 4, 3:40. That is the one that broke us. Frame 4 was taken from the other side of camp, from a spot 10 yards behind where the camera was strapped, looking back at our tents from inside the site. There was only one camera. Yasmin had strapped it to the tree herself and it had not moved. Standing at the tree line in frame 4, in shorts and a gray shirt, arms at his sides, facing the tents, was Peter. Peter had been asleep at 3:40. I know that because his snoring was the only thing keeping me company while something breathed at my tent seam. Peter looked at the picture of himself for a long time and then he laughed, and the laugh came apart halfway through. That was when Walter finally told us. He said that in 1981 he worked a season out west with a man from a reservation in Arizona, and one night that man told him about a thing that his people would not name after sundown. A person who had gone as far away from being a person as it is possible to go, who could wear the shape of an animal or of a man. Walter said his friend used the word Skinwalker exactly once, in daylight, and never again. And then Walter said that when he came back home to Virginia and repeated the story to an old woman who had lived on the Catawba side of that mountain her whole life, she did not laugh at him. She said they had one here. She said the old families called it the thing that wears, and that it had been on that ridge longer than the trail had, longer than the road, and that it left people alone for years at a time and then it did not. He gave us what she had given him. It watches first. It can take days about it. It learns the sounds of a place, one at a time, and it practices them badly at the start and perfectly by the end. It is drawn to a voice it has not learned yet. It wants your name in the mouth of somebody you trust, because that is the door, and you are the one who opens it. And when it has learned everything a person is, It does not need that person anymore. Sandra asked what happens to the person. Walter said, "We will not be discussing that." An hour before dusk, Peter took 4 bottles down to the seep to fill them, with Ethan standing watch at the top of the little slope, and Ethan swears on everything he has that he never took his eyes off him. Peter was gone for 40 minutes. He came back up the slope with the bottles full, and his face relaxed and easy, and said, "Sorry, I heard you calling me from up on the ridge, and I went to see what you wanted." He was looking straight at me when he said it. I had not moved from the fire ring in an hour and a half, and 8 people could tell him so, and we all watched the color drain out of him as he understood that. And then, from up on the ridge above camp, in the last of the light, we heard Peter Foster laugh. That big open bark of a laugh, the one that made strangers in a bar turn around and smile. It rolled down off the rocks and went out across the valley. Peter was standing right in front of me with a water bottle in each hand, and his mouth was closed, and the look that came over his face while he listened to himself laughing on the ridge is the last completely honest thing I ever saw him do. We built that fire up until it was a bonfire. Vincent, who had spent 30 years being careful about everything, went out and dragged in deadfall like a man possessed, and nobody told him to stop, and none of us cared what the regulations said. We sat 9 across in a rough arc, with our backs to the flames and our faces to the trees. Nobody suggested sleeping. Around 10, Vincent said that we should walk out with headlamps. 9 lamps, a tight line, nobody straying, 4 miles. Walter said no, and when Vincent pushed back, Walter said something I have repeated to myself 1,000 times since. He said, "Right now, it is out there in the trees deciding whether it can take us. If we get up and walk out strung along a trail in single file in the middle of the night, we will be 9 separate people in the woods instead of 1 group by a fire, and it will not have to decide anything at all." We stayed. It started again a little after 11, and it had improved. The whip poor Will was flawless this time, so was the crying, then a woman's scream, far off, that went on too long for a human set of lungs. Then a whistle, 2 notes, the kind a person uses to signal a friend across a parking lot, and Ethan flinched hard because it was his whistle, the one he used with his brother, and he had used it exactly once on the hike in. Sandra broke first. She stood up and screamed at the tree line to come out, to just come out and get it over with, and Crystal dragged her back down into her chair with both arms around her, and the woods answered. It used Gloria's warmth and Sandra's words and my laugh, all stitched into one voice that slid between them mid-sentence, and it said, "Come out and get it over with," in 3 people's voices at once. Then it went through the day. It gave us back our own conversations, Vincent asking about the stove fuel, word for word, with his exact stresses. Crystal asking whether birds get sick. Gloria saying something about her granddaughter that she had said only to Peter, quietly, that afternoon, 20 feet from the rest of us. Then it said a sentence I had last heard 11 years earlier, at a funeral, standing in a parking lot in the rain, when Peter had put his hand on my shoulder and said the exact words it was now saying in Peter's voice from somewhere behind the tents. There were 2 people alive who had heard that sentence. One of them was me, and the other one was sitting 8 feet away with his knees pulled up to his chest, and neither of us had ever repeated it to a living soul. And then it went quiet. And the quiet was worse than anything it had said. I do not know how long that lasted. Long enough for the fire to drop. Long enough that Yasmin started to cry very softly, and Gloria held on to her. Long enough that I began, God help me, to believe that it had gone. The sound that broke it was a zipper. 3 inches. Pause. 3 inches. Pause. Somebody unzipping a tent with enormous patience about 15 feet behind us, in the second row of tents, where Peter had left his gear. Peter was not in his tent. Peter was sitting right there in the ark with the rest of us, and every one of us turned around at the same time. Ethan had his weapon out already. Vincent had the big lamp. He swung the beam over, and it caught the whole of it, and I got maybe 2 full seconds of clear sight, and those 2 seconds are welded into the inside of my skull. It was crouched over Peter's tent, and it was rising as the light hit it. It stood taller than the tent poles. The legs bent backward at the second joint like a deer's, and then forward again at the ankle like a man's. The shoulders were far too wide, and the arms hung down past the knees and ended in long human hands. And the head was a deer skull, worn, not grown, sitting crooked on the neck so that one antler rode low. There was something under the skull. I could see wet movement in the gap along the jaw where a face should have been, and I could see an eye, high up, past where the socket ended. It looked at us the way you look at furniture. Ethan fired 3 times. I know he hit it, because I heard 2 of the 3, that flat slapping sound of a round going into a body. It did not stagger. It did not hurry. It turned, and it walked out of the light and into the trees on those backward legs, at a pace no faster than a man crossing a room. And Peter was not in the ark with us anymore. I never saw him go. I have gone over it 10,000 times. He was there when the zipper started, I would swear to it. And after the light swung away, he was not. And the only sound between the two was something heavy being dragged over dry pine needles. We scattered. Everything Walter had told us went out of us in one breath, and 9 people ran 9 directions into a black forest, which is exactly what it had spent 2 days and 2 nights waiting for. I went off the north edge of the camp, fell most of a slope, and ended up in the boulder field below the knob with my hands bleeding, and I crawled back under a low sandstone overhang until my spine hit stone, and then I stayed there. I was under that rock for around 5 hours. And for all 5 hours, above me and around me and once directly over my head, it practiced. It said Vincent's name in Gloria's voice. It said Gloria's name in Crystal's voice. It called for Sandra in mine, and it was good. It was so good that I put my fist in my mouth and bit down on it. It ran through every one of us, and then it started on Peter. The first attempts were wrong. Too high, too fast. The vowels stretched strangely. It said, "Hey, are you out here?" in something that was almost my friend and not quite, and it said it again and again, adjusting, the way a person works at a difficult phrase in a language they are learning. It got the laugh right before the speech. Then it got the little catch he had in his throat when he was cold. By about 4 in the morning, when the sky over Tinker Cliffs had gone the color of ash, it said, "Hey, I am okay. I am right here." And it was perfect. It was him. There was not one thing left in that voice that was not Peter Foster. It stopped after that. It had what it came for. Something moved along the rocks toward my overhang around then, and I felt my whole body give up, and a hand came in and clamped over my mouth, and it was Walter Russell, filthy and gray-faced, his glasses gone. He put his mouth against my ear and he said, "Listen to me. Do not make a sound." He said, "It has him. It has had him for hours." He said, "When the sun comes up, there are going to be 9 of us at that fire ring. You are going to count, because I know you count, and the number is going to be right, and the number is a lie." And then he said the thing that got us off that mountain. He said, "It only knows what it has practiced. It has been practicing him. It has not been practicing you. So do not accuse it. Do not run from it. Do not let it see that you know. You walk down that trail, and you treat it like your friend, and you do not stop treating it like your friend until you are on the road." The sun came up at 6:11, and it was the ugliest sunrise of my life. We came back to that campsite 1 and 2 at a time out of the trees, filthy, scraped, half of us without our packs. Crystal had lost a boot somewhere and had walked back in 1 sock. Vincent could not stop shaking. Yasmin had a gash across her forearm that Crystal cleaned with hands that would not hold steady, and Peter Foster was sitting on the log by the cold fire ring with his pack loaded and squared beside him, smiling at us as we came in. I counted 1 through 9. He said he had run down the hill and gotten turned around and slept a couple of hours under a rhododendron, and he was fine. He said he was fine 3 separate times over the next few minutes, and every time it was the same 3 words with the same pauses in exactly the same places, like a line of music played back twice. I want to tell you, it was obvious. It was not. For long stretches of that morning it was Peter, completely, and my mind went scrambling after any explanation that would let me have my friend back. But the tells were there, and once you see one, you see all of them. His pack was rolled, everything in it, rolled tight and stacked in even rows. Peter stuffed his gear. 10 summers, and I never once saw that man roll anything. Gloria noticed it and went absolutely still. His watch was on his right wrist. It had been on his left for a decade. He did not blink for long stretches and then blinked several times fast, like something remembering to. There were flies on us all by then, and 2 of them walked across his open eye, and he did not so much as twitch. There was blood dried thick in the welt seams of both his boots, and no cut on him anywhere. And when Vincent said we needed to move, he answered, in Peter's exact voice, "Is everybody good? Are we all good?" Which is a thing Peter had said on Saturday morning in the parking lot, with the same rising note at the end. Word for word. Note for note. Gloria hugged him. She could not help it. She wrapped both arms around him the way she had every year for 10 years, and I watched her face over his shoulder, and I watched the color go out of it, and I watched her arms come down. She stepped back and she smiled at him, and she said nothing at all for the next 4 miles. Then we walked out. 4 miles. It took us a little over 2 hours. It was the longest 2 hours that have ever happened to anybody. It walked in the middle of the line, because that is where Peter always walked, and it talked the entire way down, because that is what Peter did. It asked Crystal which hospital she worked out of and what shift. It asked Yasmin when her grandchildren came to stay and whether they came alone. It asked Gloria which road she took home and whether she still lived out past the church by herself. It was warm and it was curious and it was interested in every single one of us, and we answered, because Walter had told us to act normal, and so we stood on that trail in the morning sun and gave it directions to our houses. It got better as it went. That is the part I dream about. Peter had broken an ankle years back and had a small hitch in his stride on long descents, and the thing wearing him did not have it at the top of the ridge, and picked it up somewhere around the shelter, and by the time we crossed the fire road, it was walking exactly like my friend. At the last switchback, Sandra stopped dead and I saw her weight shift, and I knew she was about to run, and Walter simply put his hand flat between her shoulder blades and left it there, and she started walking again. We came out at the road crossing a little after 10, and the parking lot on 311 was full of Saturday people in clean clothes with dogs and coolers. The deputy took our statement because Vincent insisted on making one, and Vincent, to his enormous credit, tried. He got about 2 sentences into it before he heard how it sounded, and stopped. The deputy asked, kindly, whether anybody was hurt or missing, and he looked down the line at the 9 of us standing there in the gravel, and he counted us himself. 9. Peter Foster reached into Peter Foster's pocket and took out Peter Foster's keys and unlocked his truck. He got in. He adjusted the rearview mirror, and then he sat there and looked at his own face in it, without moving, for what must have been 15 seconds, the way you look at a photograph of somebody you are trying to place. Then he waved at us through the glass, and he pulled out onto Route 311 and drove down the mountain toward the interstate. That was 11 years ago. Peter's bank card was used for 19 days after that morning, in Virginia, then Tennessee, then a gas station outside Knoxville. His mother got texts from his phone for 3 weeks. She showed them to me. They sound like him. They use his words and his jokes, and they ask after her hip. And there is not one spelling mistake in any of them, and Peter Foster typed like a man wearing oven mitts, and every message his mother ever got from her son had at least 2. The last one said, "I am fine, I am fine, I am fine." Then the account went quiet, and the phone stopped answering, and eventually the state listed him as a missing hiker, which is a category that lets everybody stop asking questions. The next spring, a maintenance crew found his pack in the Laurel about 1.5 miles short of Tinker Cliffs, dry, undamaged, laid out flat on the ground with the straps squared and folded across it, the way you would lay out a suit. Nobody has ever found him. Walter Russell died 2 winters later. His daughter told me at the service that he had not slept a full night since that summer, and that toward the end he would not go outside after sundown for anything, and that in the last month he asked her more than once to say her own name to him so he could hear how she said it. Ethan Diaz sold everything he owned that had a scope on it and has not gone into the woods since. Yasmin burned the memory card and then had to burn the camera because the frames were on the internal storage too. Gloria moved to her sister's place in Ohio inside of a year. Vincent still has the spreadsheet. He sent it to me once, at 2 a.m, with no message attached, and I never asked him why. As for me, I count people. I count them in restaurants, in waiting rooms, in the church at Walter's funeral. It takes 2 seconds, and nobody notices. I do it every time I walk into a room, and if the number comes out wrong, I leave. I do not answer to my own name outdoors after sundown, not for neighbors, not for family, not for anything. If somebody wants me, they can come to the door where I can see them, and they can knock, and I will still look first. And last August, on a night with no wind, something stood outside my bedroom window in Botetourt County and said my name in Peter Foster's voice. I lay there with my hands over my mouth like a man under a rock on a mountain, and I did not answer. It waited. It said it again, and then it said my name in my own voice. It was rough. It was too high, and the vowels came out stretched, the way a person sounds when they are working at a difficult phrase in a language they are still learning. But it was closer than it had been the year before. 9 of us went up McAfee Knob on the first Saturday in July. 8 of us are still breathing. And the 9th one is out there somewhere in a black tree line at the edge of somebody else's camp right now. Patient, listening, practicing, getting the voice right. If you ever hear a friend call you from the trees, and you are certain, absolutely certain, that your friend is asleep in the tent beside you, do not answer.